All right, welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee for March 11th. For the few of you who are already here, we are going to get through as many of these bills as possible, maybe all of them before the second floor session. Depending on how that goes, we'll decide whether we're going to do our voting session before the second floor session, after. I know some subcommittees are also meeting, so it's going to be a continued long day. So let us get started with that long day with House Bill 902 from Delegate Lehman, Environment, Coal Combustion Byproducts, Fees, Coordinating Committee, and Regulations. And if you have a panel, please bring them up. And we're joined by some guests from the Economic Matters Committee.
Bringing up my panel.
Perfect.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and esteemed ENT colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Mary Lehman. I'm asking for your favorable consideration of House Bill 902. So, by way of background, this is a coal ash bill. By way of background, I knew very little about coal ash until I attended a clean water conference in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 2023. I learned that Maryland has millions of tons of coal ash in approximately 70 landfills around the state, but that a new regulation from EPA was anticipated to better address the cleanup of what are called legacy coal ash sites. Those are the sites that are no longer actively receiving coal ash waste. I proposed coal ash legislation in the 2024 session that went to the Economic Matters Committee. The bill was not voted on because MDE was taking a wait-and-see approach, anticipating that EPA rule, figuring it would be published shortly after session. That rule was published in May of 2024. This bill is partly a response to that regulation and seeks to ensure monitoring and cleanup of coal ash sites in Maryland continues even if the Trump administration rolls back these regulations. So what is coal ash and what does this legislation do to address it? Coal ash is also known as coal combustion residuals, or CCRs. It's produced from the burning of coal in coal-fired power plants. It contains toxic chemicals including arsenic, boron, cobalt, chromium, lead, lithium, mercury, radium, selenium, and other heavy metals, which have been linked to cancer, heart and thyroid disease, reproductive failure, and neurological harm. These contaminants leach out of landfills, migrate into soil and surface water, make their way into drinking water, including wells. Finer coal ash, which I had heard a little bit about in my time on the Prince George's County Council, is known as fly ash, and it can more readily become airborne. In Brandywine, there is a fly ash facility that's in southern Prince George's County, and it is the 7th most contaminated coal ash dump in the entire country. This bill gives the Maryland Department of Environment the tools it needs to monitor the containment, mitigation, and potential beneficial reuse of millions of tons of coal ash that has been landfilled across the state and pose a serious threat of contaminating soil, surface water, groundwater, and again, drinking water, well water. Specifically, the bill requires MDE to adopt that federal legacy coal ash regulation that was published last May. It also directs MDE to adopt EPA's 2024 effluent rule that regulates the release of wastewater that contains these toxic metals that I mentioned into bodies of water. Currently, MDE disagrees with the need to adopt the effluent rule, but I am still in conversation with the agency about this. The bill also provides MDE with the authority to go beyond the May 2024 EPA final legacy regulations if necessary to protect human health and the environment. And it creates a statewide coal combustion byproducts coordinating committee that includes citizens from impacted communities to help ensure that science and citizen involvement continue to guide the implementation of new regulations. I want to stress that citizen involvement is very important. You will hear from some residents of impacted community, and they have really never been directly involved in these discussions or the focus of monitoring and cleanup. So I am going to have amendments, Mr. Chair, and those came about from a series of conversations with MDE staff dating back to last summer. We've reached a consensus on a few of those, including that the bill will no longer include a new and higher fee on industry because MDE cannot collect more than it's able to spend on oversight and monitoring of the state's largest coal ash sites. Another change will be a December 2025 deadline for MDE to adopt additional regulations to augment the legacy rule. That's been pushed back to December of 2026. And then it codifies MDE's authority. The third amendment would codify MDE's authority to use any excess industry fees to monitor smaller coal ash sites across the state and promote beneficial reuse. And I have submitted language on that, and MDE has indicated it's fine, but it might want to tweak that a little bit. So I just want to say, with respect to that legacy rule, that Earth Justice believes that there are at least 18 previously unregulated coal ash sites in Maryland that are newly regulated now under that May 2024 rule, with requirements for monitoring toxic chemical releases for cleanup, and that would include the 217-acre Brandywine facility that I mentioned. In summary, I think it is really important for Maryland to ensure that these legacy impoundments remain regulated regardless of what happens federally. That is just so important. This legislation will ensure that Marylanders remain protected even if the Trump administration withdraws or weakens EPA's 2024 guidelines. And also, this legislation again gives MDE the authority to go further than those May 2024 federal guidelines if necessary to protect human health and the environment. Marylanders really should not have to incur the toxic impacts of this industry's carelessness and its harmful actions in failing to clean up tons of coal ash produced from coal-fired power plants. The bill ensures Maryland communities remain protected regardless of potential federal backsliding, and the bill ensures that producers of coal ash waste pay for government oversight of the cleanup of legacy sites. And finally, again, it provides local communities proximate to these coal ash disposal sites a real voice in the cleanup, and I urge a favorable report. And thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Corman and committee members. Thank you for hearing my testimony today in strong support of HB 902. My name is Dave Arndt, a Baltimore resident, a chemical engineer, a retiree of National Institutes of Health, a member of the Coming Clean Network, a national nonprofit environmental health and environmental justice organization, and a contributing author and member of the Union of Concerned Scientists. Coal ash contains 17 heavy toxic metals and pollutants which can endanger human health, at least 6 neurotoxins and 5 known or suspected carcinogens. Coal ash mostly pollutes our environment in 3 ways. First, groundwater contamination, which occurs when water leaches out of the holding areas into the underlying aquifer. Second, when holding areas overflow, mostly due to large rain events, which are happening more frequently, and most holding areas are not designed for these events. Finally, dust is emitted into the air by loading, unloading, and transport, and by the wind. Many of our communities have been impacted by the legacy of toxic coal ash. This is also an environmental justice issue because historically, a high number of coal-fired plants and coal ash landfills have been situated in Black, brown, and low-income communities. HB 902 provides 2 critical provisions. It ensures that the current federal regulations for coal ash disposal sites remain regulated even if the current federal administration, through the EPA, rescinds or weakens the current regulations. It also provides MDE with the authority to go beyond the May 2024 EPA regulations if necessary to protect human health and the environment. Furthermore, it ensures that science and community involvement continue to help guide the implementation of these new requirements. For all these reasons, I strongly support HB 902 and urge a favorable report in committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman and the entire committee. My name is Denise Keener, and I am a Legacy Leader Volunteer in Delegate Lehman's office. I'm also a former executive with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and a former Assistant Secretary at the Maryland Department of the Environment. I have over 40 years of experience in environmental policy and regulation, including the regulation of toxic chemicals, water-related issues, and solid waste. I'm asking the committee for a favorable report on House Bill 902. House Bill 902 is fundamentally about doing a better job of reducing the human health and environmental risks associated with coal ash. Coal ash, as Delegate Lehman indicated, contains many toxic chemicals, and toxic chemicals can enter the environment through groundwater contamination and also runoff from sites where this material has been placed. EPA and the Maryland Department of the Environment have worked long and hard to establish regulations to address coal ash disposal risks. In May of 2024, as Delegate Lehman indicated, EPA finally took action to address the one remaining major gap in regulation. They issued final rules to address legacy coal ash disposal sites. And these are sites that received many years of coal ash placement prior to 2015. These sites are more likely to be unlined, and they are more likely to result in contamination of groundwater and nearby surface water. This bill requires MDE to promulgate the May 2024 rule into Maryland regulations, protecting our state from potential federal rollback of the 2024 environmental law controlling combustion residuals. The bill also, as Delegate Lehman indicates, provides the Maryland Department of the Environment with the authority to go further than the May 2024 law if necessary to protect human health and the environment. I urge you for a favorable report on House Bill 902.
Thank you. Delegate Lehman, there's a couple of virtual witnesses. Are they part of your panel, or should we take questions if there are questions? Are they part of your panel?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's bring up the Potomac River Keepers Network, Dean Nahos, if he's on.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry, my video's not turning on for some reason. But I am Dean Nahos, Potomac River. There we go. Sorry about that. Dean Nahos, Potomac River Keeper. Thank you for the opportunity today. Obviously, we're testifying in favor of this bill. I just think it's important to, remind the committee that, over 13 years ago, all the big coal ash landfills that GenOn owns, particularly in Charles County, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County, have been leaking, and MDE put them under consent order 12 years ago. And in 2015, finally EPA came out with its new federal CCR rules that they delegated down to the states to start dealing with coal ash ponds particularly. And over time, I think it became clear that a lot of the states were not managing and overseeing coal ash very well. Basically in 2023, the Environmental Protection Agency identified coal ash as its top enforcement priority because the states were not doing a good enough job on protecting communities and cleaning up sites. And then in 2024, EPA released its new coal ash bills, legacy rule. And that rule in and of itself, just adopting it in this legislation is very, very important. But they did it because they recognized that there was a lot of coal ash that hadn't been cleaned up under the 2015 rules. And so states like North Carolina years ago, all the way back in 2015, put in legislation that went well above the federal rules. I worked on legislation in Virginia in 2019 to make Dominion clean up 28 million tons of ash and recycle 7 million. So other states have been developing their own legislation to deal with this very, very important issue. And it's very clear, with the Trump administration, that they're going to stay these rules like they did with the coal combustion rules back in 2017. And so I think it's just very important that Maryland move forward and do its own and adopt the legacy rules and support this bill. And I'm sorry for going over, but thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll turn to Jason Litton from Frostburg State.
Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify and support.
Sorry, you cut out. Did you maybe get muted?
Sorry, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Jason Litton. I'm the co-director of the Western Maryland Regional GIS Center at Frostburg State University. For years, I've researched the number, location, history, and characteristics of coal ash disposal sites across the Chesapeake Bay watershed, particularly in Maryland. Maryland has approximately 70 known coal ash disposal sites, ranging from large landfills containing millions of tons to smaller sites where coal ash was used as structural fill. Many of these sites are unlined and near water bodies, posing significant risk to groundwater, surface water, and public health. The EPA's 2024 regulations closed a long-standing gap by finally addressing legacy disposal sites, including numerous sites in Maryland that will now require monitoring and cleanup. However, history has shown that federal regulations on coal ash can be delayed, weakened, or reversed, making state-level action essential to ensure long-term oversight and protection. HB 902 will ensure Maryland remains proactive in regulating coal ash sites, even if federal policies shift. It will strengthen monitoring and cleanup efforts, increase oversight funding, and support beneficial reuse where safe and feasible. Properly processed coal ash can be repurposed in cement and construction materials, reducing the demand for virgin materials while preventing long-term environmental harm. Where removal is impractical, strong containment and monitoring must be required. This bill is a win for both industry and the environment. It provides a pathway for coal ash to be safely reused in products like cement, reducing landfill waste while lowering costs for businesses. At the same time, it protects Maryland's waterways and communities from toxic contamination, ensuring a cleaner, safer future. With responsible oversight, we can turn an industrial waste problem into an opportunity for innovation and economic benefit. Without action, these disposal sites can continue to leach toxic metals like arsenic, lead, and selenium into our waterways. This bill ensures that the communities affected by coal ash contamination have a voice in cleanup decisions, and that the responsibility of oversight falls on industry, not the public. I urge the committee to support HB 902 and take this crucial step towards protecting Maryland's water resources, public health, and environmental future. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ignorance is bliss here. So over time, coal was the primary source of generating electricity in Maryland. Got that part. And we've shut down a lot of these plants subsequently along the way for power. When the potash was dumped, do we have any idea how many of those places were lined or not lined, or is it just a, I mean, it has to be, is it documented somewhere?
Most of the legacy sites that we're talking about are not lined sites. As of 2015, regulations went into place that required proper management of ongoing disposal of coal ash. But prior to that, there weren't any requirements specifically for.
So you think they dug a hole in the ground and dumped the potash?
There was a lot of dumping, yeah.
Okay, then tell me how you came up with the $2.30.
Say that again.
The $2.30.
Yeah, there are folks here from MDE who can better address that, but the way they explained it to me is they cannot take in more than a certain amount based on the size of the current program, and the current program focuses mostly on the largest sites. There's 4 really large sites. The 3 of those 4 between them have 5 million tons of coal ash each, and the focus has been on those larger sites. Interestingly, this law is sort of overseen and mainly managed by MDE, but then the Department of Natural Resources plays a part, and they, under the Power Plant Research Program, have mapped out where all of these landfills are, approximately 70 across the state. And I'm losing track of what.
My question, why couldn't it be $1.75?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So we originally had the idea, the fee has virtually gone away. And so last year, the MDE put forward a fee bill, and a coal ash fee was part of a larger fee bill that passed the House but never passed the Senate. So MDE actually has a standalone bill to again renew that fee. So first of all, because they have their own fee bill, they didn't think it was necessary for me to address the fee in my bill. But I also was looking to increase that fee, and they explained that that was not possible because of the size of their program. They're required through both existing statute and regulations to adjust that fee up or down, year to year. And if I increased the fee by the amount I was looking to increase it, then they would just have to turn around and adjust it downward based on the size program they run now, if that makes sense. But you can ask MDE for additional explanation.
So the $62 billion fiscal note might not be appropriate.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is that a fair statement?
I am not aware of that.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Any further questions, Delegate Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Lehman, for this bill. And thank you to your panel, one of whom is my constituent. Great to see you, Mr. Arndt. One of you mentioned in passing that coal ash could be partly just managed in some way and partly recycled. Could you explain what sort of recycling products would be produced in coal ash recycling?
In terms of it being managed versus recycled, those are sort of two different but related things. So the focus of the bill is really to monitor and ensure, containment, that it's not running off, and which it already is doing, but it's not, further leaking and getting into, groundwater and surface water and drinking water. There is something, an idea that's been around for a long time called beneficial reuse, where it can be used in cement products. And I thought we were going to have somebody from industry to talk a little bit about that. Mr. Najukes from the Potomac River Keepers is fairly knowledgeable, or at least more than I am, about beneficial reuse. And Professor Litton also has probably some more insights than I do. And I don't know if Ms. Kainer wants to address that.
Yeah, I think that, one of the principal ways that coal ash can be used, depending on its purity, because sometimes the coal ash was disposed of with other materials too. But cement production, as Delegate Lehman indicated, is one potential way that these residuals can be used and be essentially solidified, reducing their environmental impact. Much better to do that than just to leave it in the ground.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I do not see any further questions. Just a reminder for everybody who's going to testify and all my colleagues on the horseshoe, try to get close to your mics and speak loud, because apparently we're having trouble hearing each other, and we want to make sure we're all hearing each other while we're engaging on these bills. We will call up the remainder of our in-person testimony. We have favorable testimony from Karen Sanu or Kamita Gray, and then we have favorable amendment testimony from Jeremy D. Baker from the Maryland Department of the Environment. So Delegate Lehman, thanks to you and your panel. You can move off stage right or stage left. And we'll call up Karen Sanu or Kamita Gray and Jeremy D. Baker. Any of them here?
All right. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I am actually not Jeremy Baker. I think something got lost in translation a little bit. I am Zachary Schaefer, Assistant Secretary for Policy at the Maryland Department of the Environment. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee, thank you for having us. The department is pleased to address House Bill 902 concerning coal combustion byproducts and seeks your favorable consideration with amendments. I'm about 5 weeks new to the agency following 4 years serving at the U.S. EPA, where I was proud to work on the coal and steam electric regulatory package that we finalized in May 2024, especially on the steam effluent guideline rule that Delegate Lehman mentioned. Coal combustion and its byproducts present hazards to human health. In particular, they contain elevated levels of pollutants that have been mentioned, which can contaminate our air, land, and water. As the 2 remaining coal-fired power plants in Maryland reach the end of their useful lives in the very near future, the state must focus its long-term efforts on ensuring that responsible parties appropriately manage and clean up legacy coal combustion residuals now and into the future. Even when there is no more coal being burned at these plants, MDE will continue to have to monitor and inspect these impoundments and the ash within them for decades. That's why both this bill and the department's user fee legislation, SB 250, mentioned previously, make important changes to the existing coal combustion byproducts fee structures. This is not new, but it is a new approach necessary because our state's power plants no longer use coal for fuel, so as a result, they no longer generate new coal ash, which was the source of the current fee. We also support this legislation's efforts to look beyond the largest residual management areas, of which there are 4 in the state, and to explore fee structures and other strategies to address smaller, dispersed disposal sites. To date, the department and DNR have identified 49 sites with less than 10,000 tons of residuals, of which 16 sites are able to be reclaimed. Thank you for your time, and thank you for considering a favorable vote with amendments. I look forward to addressing any questions.
Thank you very much. I do not see any questions. We have virtual favorable testimony from Noah Waters. Please go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and committee members. I am Mayor Noah Waters of the town of Eagle Harbor, a fence line community beside the Chalk Point Power Plant, and I am asking for your favorable report on HB 902. As we experience existential legacy impacts of infrastructure supporting coal combustion, with testing of our well water indicating PCB levels at 15 times the EPA standard, HB 902 is needed and ensures that Maryland communities remain protected regardless of potential federal backsliding, ensures that the producers of coal ash waste pay for the governmental oversight of the cleanup of legacy sites, and provides local communities proximate to legacy coal and disposal sites a voice in the cleanup of these sites. Toxic chemicals from coal ash do not stay in these dump sites. They migrate downward into groundwater, run off into our creeks, streams, and rivers and bays, and are transported in the air. They do not just go away on their own. As witness to the need for HB 902, Eagle Harbor is also downstream from the Brandywine Ash Management Facility that has been leaching coal ash into our groundwater for decades and is considered one of the most contaminated ash dump sites in the United States. In 2021, due to concerns about contaminants in the water and soil, the town requested that the Maryland Department of Environment test the quality of the water for contaminants due to decades of coal combustion at the neighboring Chalk Point Power Plant. MDE did not test the water or the soil. To date, no efforts have been made to clean up the water that we use for our wells to drink, bathe, and to clean. In support of HB 902, Marylanders should no longer have to incur the toxic impacts of this industry's careless and harmful actions and failing to clean up the tons of coal ash that has been produced by their facilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not see any questions. So that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 902. We'll turn to House Bill 1088. Delegate Stein, Coal Dust Cleanup and Asthma Remediation Act. I know you have a panel, so please bring them up.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. 3 years ago, we passed the Climate Solutions Now Act. Back in 2023, MDE issued its Climate Pollution Reduction Plan to help implement Climate Solutions Now. Both the Act and the plan have ambitious strategies to help us get to our pollution reduction goals. Some of these programs can be implemented through regulatory means, some require funding. But as we all know, we're in a fiscal crisis and the state has many important priorities that are competing for scarcer dollars. So to accomplish our climate goals, a new source of funding needs to be identified, and this legislation does just that. This bill would direct as much as $300 million annually to programs that will benefit homeowners, business owners, schools, EV infrastructure, mass transit, and communities along coal rail lines. Now, Maryland already has a successful program that charges a fee on oil that's transported into the state and uses that revenue to address oil spills and protect communities. This bill builds on that oil transport fee model. It has 4 components. It establishes a fee of $13 per short ton for coal transported through Maryland to be paid into a fossil fuel mitigation fund. More than 80% of the $300 million that will be generated annually will be paid by exporters of coal. It directs, number 2, second item is it directs 40% of the revenue to support overburdened and underserved communities, including those who for decades have been negatively impacted by the transport of coal. Coal cars are uncovered, which means that as the cars move through communities, coal dust fills the air and leaves a film of dust on cars, houses, playgrounds. And of course, people and children breathe in this coal dust. So therefore, the fund will also provide $5 million each year for the treatment of asthma, which is one of the most significant public health problems in the communities along coal routes. The fund will also provide money for home energy efficiency and electrification, mass transit, energy efficiency in commercial, multifamily, and institutional buildings, and for electric vehicles and school buses and EV charging equipment. The bill would also authorize the Maryland Clean Energy Center to receive 50% of the proceeds to issue a bond to fund these types of improvements so that we could have potentially $1 billion of climate improvements very quickly. And you'll hear more from the director of the Clean Energy Center shortly. And you'll also hear from panelists about the impact of coal and air pollution on its connection to asthma and about the impacts of coal dust on our communities in broader terms. And you'll also hear from a researcher who has studied the potential impact the bill would have on the export of coal from the Port of Baltimore. The researchers have found that this fee on average is much less than the additional cost to reroute coal to the next closest possible export terminal in Norfolk and Hampton Roads in Virginia, meaning the fee does not create a risk to the port. So in closing, this legislation provides a practical solution to address the health and environmental impacts of coal transport while creating a source of revenue for the state that is very much needed to alleviate the growing impacts of climate change in Maryland. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, I'm Kim Coble, Executive Director with the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, here in strong support of HB 1088, the Coal Dust Cleanup and Asthma Remediation Act. HB 1088 is a priority bill for Maryland LCV, and we appreciate Delegate Stein's leadership on this issue. Additionally, I serve as the co-chair of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change and the Mitigation Working Group. The commission makes recommendations to the governor and to the members of the General Assembly on ways for Maryland to meet its climate goals, and has consistently acknowledged the need for more funds to be generated to advance the state's climate actions. This bill does exactly that. It will raise revenue, help the state meet our climate and environmental goals, and it directly addresses public health. We believe it is a smart, targeted way to raise significant funds for climate change and ensure that communities most affected by pollution are supported by those who are responsible for that pollution. I'd like to draw your attention to the documents attached to my testimony, which has been co-signed by 24 organizations from across the state. First is an independent analysis by researchers at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, which demonstrates that this fee is on average less than half the additional cost to the coal companies of rerouting their business to ports in Virginia. One of the authors of this report will be offering informational testimony. Second, 3 letters from community members living with coal dust pollution in Baltimore City and who will directly benefit from this legislation. We know there's concerns about potential unintended consequences of this legislation, and we'd like to work with the sponsor and stakeholders to make adjustments if needed. We urge you a favorable response.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and esteemed members of the committee. For the record, I'm Kathy Magruder, the Executive Director of the Maryland Clean Energy Center. We are the statutorily enabled statewide green bank for Maryland. I'm here today to talk to you about this bill. We are working with the sponsor to request certain clarifying amendment language, but there are 2 questions that we'd like to try to help you address this afternoon. 1, why enact this legislation? And 2, why direct a dedicated portion of the funds to MCEC as a statewide green bank? First, we want to understand the value of leveraging private investment. The center, in its time since 2009, has taken $15.4 million in public funds and levered over $206 million in private capital to implement measures that help us address our climate goals. A study done by the Center for Climate Strategies indicate that an estimated $1 billion in transactional investments need to be made to achieve those goals. The state spends now just over $500 million annually. In order for us to get to where we want to be, we can't afford to wait. This bill offers a source of funding that can be put to use now. I want to also point to the economic analysis that was done by the Center for Climate Strategies that talks about the potential impact from an investment of $150 million spent now, which would create approximately 280 full-time equivalent jobs, generate over $2 billion in private capital investment, and result in over 31 million kilowatt hours of energy saved and 11,625 metric tons of CO2 reduction. So those are real results. MCEC has done this successfully. We have a track record of success. We worked with institutions across the state in every jurisdiction, including Coppin University, Morgan State University, UMBC, University of Maryland College Park, and others. We're currently preparing to do a transaction with Goucher to help them replace their chiller. We've done over $48 million in bond transactions.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman and committee members. Thank you for hearing my testimony today in strong support of HB 1088. My name is Dave Arndt, a Baltimore resident and a co-chair of the Maryland Legislative Coalition Climate Justice Wing. Last October, I was at an MDE hearing along with several hundred others testifying about the coal piles in Curtis Bay. I heard evidence by Johns Hopkins researchers and local residents on how coal dust inundates and permeates the whole community of Curtis Bay and other neighborhood communities. The research confirms that coal dust is present at the high school and at the local community center. I heard stories of people not opening their windows for decades, and yet coal dust still finds a way inside their homes. Others not allowing their children to play outside, and a multitude of people having asthma and cancer. Coal dust contains heavy metals, pollutants, neurotoxins, and known carcinogens. Residents of the communities around coal piles also have lower rates of health care coverage and less access to quality and affordable health care to provide relief to them when they get sick. It is no wonder that the life expectancy in Curtis Bay is 15 years less than other communities in Baltimore. The issues go beyond health. Property values are also depressed, and many cannot afford to leave even if they wanted to. However, this is a community, and forcing people to move because we have allowed their community to become a sacrifice zone is environmental injustice. Coal use is on a steep decline. The question is not if coal will be replaced, the question is when. No company is investing in new coal terminals. Exporters will use their terminals until demand dies out. The coal terminals, which are connected to the train lines, have great value. We should be working on which new companies can replace the coal terminals. It could be really thousands of jobs, and CSX could still get paid for the rail service. The benefits of HB 1088 are clear, and I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. I also thank Ann Bristow, a virtual witness, is on your panel. Is that right? Okay. Ann Bristow, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please proceed.
All right. Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and committee members, greetings from Mountain, Maryland. I'm Ann Bristow and live in Garrett County, about 2 miles from the Allegheny County line. I'm situated between coal mines, an underground mine producing metallurgical coal 20 miles to my west, and a surface mine 5 miles to my east. I'm also 12 miles from Cumberland, Maryland, a CSX rail hub and major commercial route for mountain coal to Baltimore. I've lived here for almost 4 decades and have seen pollution from coal dust, whether blowing off the top of the mountain, when following coal trucks from mines, or driving through Cumberland or along CSX lines. I've been in friends' homes or in businesses in Cumberland and have seen and felt coal dust coating people's windowsills and inside these buildings, particularly if windows were left open. Think of asthma as an early warning sign within lungs intolerant of particulate pollution, predominantly coal dust in my region. Many of us don't have such intolerances, but that doesn't mean coal dust isn't having an effect on your lungs. Both cancers and cardiovascular disease have established links with air pollution, and historical and current coal mining, processing, and transport are significant sources of this pollution. Allegheny County exceeds state averages for both of these chronic diseases. Asthma rates are 2 times higher in Allegheny County than Maryland as a whole. I urge favorable report of this bill that would provide community and public health relief and support. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I think we have a question from Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, this could either go to you or any of your panel. I'm just kind of looking through the bill, and so I actually have one of these, a former coal power plant site in my district, CP Crane site, so obviously there's that potential exposure to that community. So it got me thinking, it certainly seems like the problem could be bad in certain communities, so with respect to asthma and other health conditions. If they're as bad as kind of how they've been described here, I'm not saying that they're not as bad as that, but if they are that bad, why are we only spending 2% of these funds to help with those health-related risks, the asthma and things like that? Why not a bigger number than 2%? Why not 20%? Why not 40%? You know, something like, if the long-term health impacts are that bad, why not a more substantial percentage?
A couple of things, Delegate. Certainly would be open to increasing the amount of money that is allocated for asthma treatment that's currently in the bill, but also some of the other programs that are listed in there will help residents who are dealing with coal dust. For example, if you air seal or insulate a home, which is one of the major activities that would be funded here, that reduces the amount of coal dust that comes into the house and that someone's kids can breathe. Similarly, I mean, the impact is not direct on coal dust, but on other pollutants. If you have mass transit, if you have electrified school buses, the amount of pollution that the community broadly would be on the receiving end would go down. So I guess, so my answer is twofold again. Open to considering a higher amount for asthma treatment, and again, these other activities which are funded will help in other ways.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, sir. And Delegate, I certainly appreciate that. You know, and I'm more kind of wearing sort of the hat of my community and the lens kind of thinking about that. So the coal operations aren't there anymore in this community, right? So, I mean, I'm sure there's still some residual, but I think maybe the greater impact is sort of the long-term effect that has occurred from what was there before, right? So I don't know that there's a lot of new dust necessarily blowing in someone's house or, you know, on them in that way. This community also is not serviced by any sort of mass transit line. So I'm not saying that there isn't some sort of benefit in that way, but they're not kind of having a lot of those services already in the community. So I'm not sure that all of those elements in some of these other kinds of areas that maybe have a historic legacy would see that level of benefit that maybe some that are, you know, close to the port right now. So I think maybe for some of those kind of communities, maybe the funding mix needs to look a little different is what I would say. Isn't that so? I'll leave it as a question there.
And if I could follow up, Mr. Chair, the bill does say that 40% of the funding is to be allocated to overburdened and underserved communities. So to the extent that being close proximity to a former coal mine would mean that certain of the communities that you described fall under that definition, then they would be eligible for activities under the bill. And I would be willing, if you would like, to discuss other ways to remediate the past impact of coal mining, coal distribution beyond what's in the, you know, the pages of the bill as it currently exists.
Sure, we can have a good discussion offline. Thank you.
Great, that'll come with a co-sponsorship amendment, I'm sure. Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Delegate Stein, I was reading bunches of the testimony, and you know, some from longshoremen concerned about job loss, and Maryland Chamber, and MDOT's information letter talking. You know, a lot of them are talking about the impact. Has there been any consideration to covering these train cars when they come across the state as a compromise?
I don't. Maybe Kim, if I could defer to Ms. Coble.
Delegate, our understanding is that that's actually governed by the federal government because of interstate, you know, a coal car, when it comes into Maryland, can't get covered and then get uncovered as it goes into Virginia. So it's not something that we can mandate individually by state.
So it doesn't happen anywhere in the country? Is that what you're saying?
That's my understanding. Apparently there's concern of fire hazard.
Okay. Thank you.
Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate, for the bill. A couple questions. The money the money, coal travels west to east. So we have a lot of communities through the Panhandle, northern Maryland that are affected. Nothing down by me, I can promise you. Yet a lot of the money, according to where you're going to go to, is going to go to EV, electrification, things like that in urban areas. My concern becomes, the Transportation Trust Fund is a little bit broke. If, in fact, we look at the port and the coal companies opt to say, well, we'll go somewhere else, what kind of a hit would that be to the Transportation Trust Fund?
Well, it certainly would be a hit, but there was as we mentioned, there was a study done, and one of the authors of the study will be testifying later that demonstrated that the cost of avoiding Maryland on the part of a coal exporter to, say, go to the Port of Virginia is far greater than the fee. So they wouldn't have an economic incentive to move.
Then my next question is, why is this not a violation of the Commerce Clause?
I can provide you the opinion from the Attorney General that said that there's, I specifically asked that, and they said, I mean, they're never going to say, no way is this subject to a constitutional challenge, but they said it's not a clear violation of the Constitution.
In Maryland or the federal Constitution?
Federal.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very important industry to the economies in both Allegheny and Garrett County. And we have hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousand or more people employed in that industry. They're very, very good paying jobs. So I was wondering, did you give any consideration to the economic impact this would have on Allegheny and Garrett counties?
Well, the way we went about that was through this study, commissioning this study, and at least with respect to the Port of Baltimore, the export of coal, which is substantial through the Port of Baltimore. What this researcher found, who will be talking later, is that the fee is less than the cost of going elsewhere. So in other words, it's quite likely that the current patterns of commerce would continue.
Quite likely.
Yes, there are no guarantees in life, but yes.
Yeah, I just see this as being devastating on Allegheny and Garrett County. Thank you.
Any additional questions for the sponsor or his panel? Okay, thank you. I think our next panel is virtual favorable witnesses. Sarah Christina Cedrumelli from the American Lung Association and Alex Casper from the American Lung Association. Please go ahead.
Dear Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee, my name is Dr. Christy Cedrumelli. I'm testifying today as a mother, a citizen of Maryland, and a pediatric pulmonologist. The opinions I express are my own, not those of my employer. As a pediatric pulmonologist at Johns Hopkins, I have treated thousands of kids with asthma from all over Maryland. Asthma affects about 7.6% of kids under 18 in our state, which is higher than the national average of 6.5%. In Baltimore City, it's more than 3 times higher than the national average. It's 20% of kids. While Maryland's adult asthma prevalence is closer to the national average, 9%, there are disparities in prevalence and severity depending where you live in our state. For example, in 2009, after Baltimore City, the 3 jurisdictions where asthma hospitalizations were the highest were Allegheny, Cecil, and Dorchester counties. Asthma is a leading cause of emergency department visits and hospitalizations, and poorly controlled asthma interferes with kids' ability to learn and play. Adults miss work when they have asthma or their kids are suffering, and the expenses add up. In 2021, asthma costs for the U.S. were $80 billion, including medical expenses, missed school and work days, and deaths. In Maryland, healthcare costs for asthma in 2020 were close to $50 million, $34 million for ED visits, and about $15.5 million for hospitalizations. Coal dust is a real contributor to poor control. When I meet with families, they want to know what they can do to make it better. I give medicines they can ensure no one smokes, but they are not aware of and cannot control what is toxic in the air. Please consider the overall impact and the true cost of exposure to toxins like coal dust in the air. Marylanders, and especially the youngest among us, should not have to shoulder the burden so that industries can maximize profits. Thank you, and I urge a favorable report for HB 1088.
and Alex Casper.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My camera doesn't seem to, it's not allowing me to turn my camera on.
That's okay, just
okay,
go ahead.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to make comments. And for the record, my name is Alex Casper. I'm the Director of Advocacy for the American Lung Association. We're here in support of House Bill 1080 and thank the sponsor for bringing it forward. While we echo our colleagues' comments regarding the environmental impacts, today we want to specifically address the impact of coal dust on people in Maryland living with asthma. Over 500,000 adults in Maryland live with asthma and almost 81,000 children. Asthma is a chronic condition that causes repeated episodes of chest tightness, wheezing, cough, and difficulty breathing. It can be life-threatening. If you've ever experienced this or had a loved one experience an asthma flare, it's terrifying. Trust me, I know my son lives with asthma and nothing is scarier than watching him struggle to breathe. Asthma can be triggered by a number of things, including allergens, exercise, and air pollution, including coal dust. There are about 17,000 asthma-related ER visits in Maryland and near 1,500 asthma-related hospitalizations. Black children in Maryland also have 5 times the rate of asthma-related emergency visits than white children. House Bill 1088 makes important investments in the asthma programming and treatment in our state and would encourage the funding to be used to provide support to families living with asthma to reach triggers, educate, manage, and control their asthma, and ensure that patients receive the healthcare and treatment access they need. The American Lung Association also supports the investment the bill would make in reducing other pollutants that harm people with asthma by cleaning up transportation and appliances. Zero-emission transportation and buildings are important priorities for the Lung Association as well because of their benefits for lung health. The American Lung Association believes everyone has the right to breathe clean, healthy air, and for this reason, we ask for a favorable report.
Thank you very much. Seeing no questions, we're going to move to further in-person favorable testimony. I'm going to say more names than there are chairs for, so just rotate in and out as you testify. Greg Sawtell, Community of Curtis Bay Association. David Jones, CCBA. Patrick Crump, MEPPN. Christopher Heaney, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Michael Middleton, SB7 Coalition. And Phil Reynolds, Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network. So when you sit down, please just go ahead and let's do a little bit of a rotation so we can receive your testimony. We'll do questions at the end of this panel if there are any. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Greg Sawtell, on the board of the Community of Curtis Bay Association. Also, I'm active with the Coalition of South Baltimore Communities. Thank you very much for hearing us today on this important piece of legislation. Just want to bring some information. South Baltimore communities have been at the forefront of both experiencing this, researching, and working to translate the research into needed action. There's been discussion about the coal trains and why aren't they covered? Are they covered in other places? South Baltimore communities have been at the forefront of the federal call to action to get those coal trains covered. It is a matter to take up at the federal level. We've met directly with EPA leadership in DC, and that's an ongoing effort. We're working with folks in coal mining communities, east, west, and between, to get that solved. It is a solvable problem. The industry acknowledges that hundreds of pounds of coal are lost during transport, and we know where that's going. It's going into the air we breathe, the water we drink, and to people's homes. Bringing it to the Maryland context, in the community called Mount Winans, the coal trains uncovered are passing within 500 feet of people's homes. When they get through Cherry Hill and then to Curtis Bay, the terminal itself is 1,000 feet away from a community rec center and where the gentleman to my right lives. So this is an issue that's been studied, well understood, the effects of particulate matter. You're going to hear more about that. But when it comes to what the state can do, this is one common sense approach that's using the tools you all have, which is to go from a place, just to put it in perspective, where there's zero compensation, there's zero mitigation. We view it as everyone who lives or works in Curtis Bay is an unpaid employee of CSX in that coal operation. And what that means is folks have to spend their time and their money cleaning off their homes, dealing with increased medical bills, zero compensation. We have a say in this, and we have opportunities to change that equation, and we're asking you to get a start with it. This is not the end of the situation, but this is a beginning to say the situation is off. There's an economic cost, there's a health cost, and it can be begun to be mitigated. And this is a first step. Thank you.
My name is David Jones. I lived in the community of Curtis Bay for over 35 years. My family's generational. to the gentleman, I didn't get to see your face, that said that this would have an impact on business and profits. You're a disgusting human being. I'm sorry, but you are.
Okay, sir.
I'm
Sir,
sorry.
sir,
I understand that. I understand that.
Not acceptable testimony.
Okay, well.
You're a guest here. We're happy to have
Sir,
you. We
I
want you to
understand that,
testify.
but this affects me
if you-
directly. My
I
life is in jeopardy every day because of this.
All right, that's enough. We're going to move on to the next witness. We can come back to you if you calm down, but we're going to move on to the next witness. Sir, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Michael Middleton. I am the Executive Director of the SB7 Coalition, which is a coalition of 6 South Baltimore communities, including Curtis Bay, Brooklyn, Cherry Hill, Westport, Mount Winans, Lakeland. And the 7 includes a Port Covington community, now known as the Baltimore Peninsula. A lot of the testimony that I would have presented has already been stated, but my concern and what I'd like to express to you is the impact that this has on human beings in our communities. These are low-income communities and primarily communities of color. We have borne the burden of coal and coal transportation for our existence. I'm 75 years old, and I was born in the Fairfield community, then moved to the public housing of Cherry Hill. And I've worked with nonprofit corporations for most of my life. I presently have COPD. I'd like to just present to you just one of the most disheartening scenes that I face on almost a weekly basis is the Harbor Hospital asthma bus in front of the early childhood program at Arundel Elementary. Arundel Elementary is a unique school. It provides exposure to education from children 2 years old to just the 2nd grade. We also had a Judy Center placed there, which provides assistance to mothers from the time period that they're pregnant until a child is 2. The Harbor Hospital asthma bus appears at that building on a weekly basis. Can you imagine that children 2 to 7 years old being tested for asthma? Thank you.
Yield back to.
Yeah, I apologize, but again, this affects me directly, sir.
Okay. Dear Chair Corman and members of the committee, thank you for having us here. I'm Dr. Chris Heaney. I'm an associate professor in environmental health and engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I, along with a team of interdisciplinary scientists from the University of Maryland, the University of California, Davis, all the way over to the School of Mines in South Africa, teamed up to respond to the community concerns of what we just heard in South Baltimore, communities of Curtis Bay, Mount Winans, with respect to the constant rate of accumulation of black dust, dark dust on their homes. And one of the challenges, one of the key moments I remember is when it really came down to it, when it came down to action that would be required by the regulatory agency. The question came up of what is the actual evidence, the scientific evidence that the black dust contains coal. This seems so obvious to everybody. So our research team, after an explosion at the CSX coal terminal in December of 2021, with this collaborative team and the communities in the leadership position and listening to the lived experiences, set out to answer this question and make scientific measurements. So that led to about a year's worth of active air monitoring with 10 different locations in South Baltimore to measure air pollutants like particulate matter of different sizes, black carbon, because the material that is being trafficked in millions of tons is black, and it's particulate, and it's dust, and the community residents have been complaining about it. And we did several things. We confirmed that whenever the wind's blowing downwind from the community, from the coal terminal towards the community, we see higher particulate matter air pollution burden, and that the black carbon is also higher. We also, through a different sophisticated technique called scanning electron microscopy,
we're able to confirm the presence of coal dust in the community. So this is the basic point here, is that community residents can be living with something so patently obvious, but need scientific evidence to confirm it. And I think you now have that evidence through the written testimony that we supplied here to confirm the presence of coal dust in these communities and move the debate beyond that point.
Thank you. Let's go all the way to my right, and then we'll track back around.
Sorry, thank you very much, Chairman. I'm Phil Reynolds. I live in Annapolis. I'm here representing the Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network. I've retired after 35 years with the United Nations, working in environment and other fields, and have seen this problem as a very important one. Global change is not only a scientific concern or just an environmental issue. It's what the United Nations calls the defining issue of our time at a defining moment. The Episcopal Church is committed to advocating for and supporting legislation that directly addresses climate change's impact on environmental justice communities. Our General Convention affirms that no community, especially communities living in poverty, should bear the heaviest burden of environmental pollution or degradation. Coal traveling through Maryland obviously creates significant pollution, air pollution, affecting the health of residents living along transport routes. Additionally, burning coal creates greenhouse gases, which is contrary to our own state's effort to fight climate change. We support this bill because it will charge a fee of $13 per ton of coal transported through Maryland. These fees will be paid into a dedicated fossil fuel mitigation fund to address pollution impacts, with 40% of the revenue channeled to support overburdened and underserved communities affected by coal transport. It'll also give $5 million to help the communities. At a time when the state faces severe budget constraints, this bill will generate approximately $300 million per year. We urge the support of this bill, which will protect these communities harmed by our dependence on dirty fossil fuels. Thank you.
Again, I apologize, but this is very time sensitive. My life is going to be cut short because of this. And I've had people in my family's life who's been cut short because of this. My dad just beat cancer, thank God. And I guarantee you this contributed to it. No one is taking this serious. All anyone cares about is what the revenue that's generated from this. $2 billion a year, that's nothing compared to the amount of lives who've been impacted since this poisonous terminal has been put into this community. CSX talks all the time about what they do in my community. They do nothing. They meet with none of us. They do nothing to protect my community. All they do is what they can to protect their profits. MDE does not do their job. The EPA does not do their job. If it wasn't for men like this man and so many other people in this fight, we wouldn't even have the science to prove what we already know. We have so many communities that have already been lost in near my community because of industry. And all we keep hearing is that industry is more important than my community. My community was there before any industry. My community fed Baltimore when it was established. I just don't know what it's going to take for people to wake up and actually do something about this. And I apologize for the way that I acted, but I don't know what to do. I literally have to take time out of my life to come to these things and do these things. I have to miss work today to be here. I just don't understand why people can't take this more seriously. We are the most inundated community in the country for industry. We have 71 industries, and no one's doing anything. If CSX is fined their 25 minimum a day, that's $10 million. The company made $14 billion last year. We need you guys to pass these laws and hold these people accountable. And again, I apologize, but please take this serious. It's not as easy as saying just move. It's not. This is my home. This is my legacy. This is my roots.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. I'm glad your dad pulled through. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you.
Well, I spoke already.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Any additional questions for this panel? Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the panel particularly the couple of panelists who are residents of District 46, which I represent. Mr. Middleton, thanks for being here. It's good to see you. I appreciate the Hopkins faculty, Dr. Haney, for your testimony. You mentioned that, and I think it's important, so thank you. You mentioned that your team, and I'm assuming you're in epidemiology, you did some surveys, you did air quality testing, and I'm curious about the technology that you used to measure particulate matter and coal dust in Curtis Bay, and if it's been used in other parts of Baltimore City or our region, what else that kind of testing can teach us about risks more broadly.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, we used a technology that's in the new multi-air pollutant sensor technology, which is an entire area of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has issued guidance around the application, the really exciting applications of this technology to address the questions of communities like South Baltimore. This same technology by companies like the QuantAQ company, which develops a modular, has been deployed in areas of the 5 boroughs of New York City to address the community concerns in the South Bronx around a similar clustering of industrial facilities. It's been used in the arid desert portions of the country and the Southwest to get at dust fence line concerns due to these large dust storms. And it actually is a unique sensor. If you've heard of others that are low-cost sensors, this is sort of a moderate-cost sensor. And it's being deployed around Baltimore. We had a really high-density network in South Baltimore with 10 nodes. But this sensor is unique in that it can measure larger particulate matter, that is PM10. And if you think about some of the dust-driven events, like dusts that could be kicked up from road dust or from accumulations of large piles of dry material like coal, you need to have a sensor which could be able to observe or measure the larger or the coarse particulates. And so we spent an inordinate amount of time with all of the leading technological designers in this space, academic scientists in our own School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins, who are experts in air pollution technology, and also in the private sector to be able to get the right kinds of devices that could address these concerns, which are really, at the end of the day, as you hear, black dusts coat people's homes, indoor and outdoor. And so that actually led us to get the right particulate matter sensor, in addition to a black carbon monitor. Coal is a carbon compound, carbonaceous compound that is black. And so the way that these measurements are typically done is to get at near roadway traffic, diesel truck traffic concerns. But we were combining this in a way with the community history there where we could get a good understanding of the larger particulate matter impacts at the fence line of the coal terminal in South Baltimore, as well as whether it was also enriched by the black, dark particulates.
I see. That's why you made that distinction. Understood. And there, if I may, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm assuming there's a gradient emanating from the coal dust, the coal terminal outward in the community so that those living closer to it are exposed to higher concentrations of particulates than those living further away. But it affects people in a broad range. You have a sense of the radius?
Well, so our study, we started off with that question, and we were able to look up to 3/4 of a mile away at the Benjamin Franklin, edge of the Benjamin Franklin High School, and we were able to detect the presence of coal dust within the Curtis Bay community, up to 3/4 of a mile away. But the other interesting feature, and we just are pushing this finding through peer review, and it's close to acceptance, is the idea that the community may live ultimately with this black dust, right, which is a daily feature of life. But the activities at the coal terminal, the wind patterns at the coal terminal, we were able to measure and quantify that when the wind is coming from a downwind direction from the coal terminal towards the community, that's when the particulate matter and the black carbon air pollution was higher than when the wind was not blowing from the coal terminal. Similarly, we were able to use a time-resolved camera, trail camera, if there's any recreational wildlife hobbyists or hunters. You can set up a trail camera and program it to take a still image, day or night vision, every minute. And we did that, and our air pollutant measurements were every minute. And we were able to code whenever we saw bulldozers crawling around the coal pile. And we could say, bulldozer activity, yes or no. And so not only was the air pollution burden higher when it was downwind versus not, but it was also higher whenever we saw visible bulldozer activity moving the coal material around. That contributes to what we call an interaction effect, that is the downwind, and an activity that is happening led to time-resolved increases in the air pollution burden in the Curtis Bay community.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Healy.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank you all, the panelists, including the man who left the room, for coming here to testify.
I apologize, ma'am.
That's okay. I just want to say thank you because I appreciate this bill. I personally grew up in coal country in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I had asthma as a child. And myself and my brother and my sister all have had cancer. I'm not sure that this is why, but I'm suspicious, and I am very sympathetic to your position, and I want to thank you for stepping up and speaking today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do not see any more questions. I believe I got all the favorable testimony, but if I missed a witness, anybody? Okay, great. I will move to the unfavorable in-person testimony. We have Dex Sloan from Core Natural Resources, David Chenoweth, Baltimore Port Alliance, as well as Host Agency LLC, and Sushant Sid, Capital Strategies. Please go ahead when you are seated. Can one of you please go ahead? Sushant, you're a pro. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Sushant Sid here on behalf of CSX Transportation in opposition to House Bill 1088. CSX has a long history in the state of Maryland and is proud of its commitment to the state's economy. We continue to make investments in the state, most notably the redevelopment of the Howard Street Tunnel in Baltimore, bringing double-stack container service to the region, improving the competitive viability of the Port of Baltimore in the aftermath of the Key Bridge tragedy. This legislation would have significant impact on the state's overall economy and specifically the Port of Baltimore. The port has a competitive advantage over other ports along the eastern seaboard because of inland location, extensive rail infrastructure. This bill, from an economic standpoint, would eliminate this advantage, making transportation of coal, which is a significant commodity for the port, cost prohibitive. CSX linkages and experience with ports are extensive, running 20,000 miles of track and serving 70 ports across the United States. Due to CSX's national reach and importance to our nation's economy, Congress has long preempted state taxes and fees imposed on the transportation of interstate commerce. The express purpose of the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act of 1995 was to eliminate economic regulation of railroads by states. State taxes and fees of this nature are also preempted by the Railroad Revitalization and Regulatory Reform Act of 1976. The Supreme Court ruled that the 4R Act prohibits state and local tax schemes that discriminate against railroads. Without federal preemption, individual states could levy fees and taxes on any commodity without regard to what other states do, severely impacting interstate commerce. Tax policy is a tool of government to influence behavior. This bill would simply encourage buyers and sellers of coal to use other ports. Global demand for coal is not likely to diminish anytime soon. For these reasons, CSX requests the committee issue an unfavorable report.
Good afternoon. My name is Dex Sloan, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategy at Core Natural Resources, which is the product of a recent merger between Consol Energy and Arch Resources. Core is the largest coal exporter at the Baltimore Port at around 19 million tons annually. We export most of that coal to steel makers and cement manufacturers. Thus, some of this coal is used for the construction of roads, bridges, and building stock. and some of it is used for the construction of a new low-carbon economy in the form of wind turbines, mass transit systems, and electric vehicles. It's important to point out that to compete, we must manage our costs intensely because Asian growth markets are halfway around the world. Every day, we are competing with Australian, Indonesian, and Russian producers, which benefit from freight rates that are half or even a third of what we incur. As the University of Maryland study rightly points out, the proposed bill would raise the total cost of moving these tons into Asia by nearly 20%. There is simply no way we could absorb that increase, or any increase, quite frankly, and still remain competitive in these faraway markets. Core owns 2 large ports, CMT in Baltimore and DTA in Newport News. Our 3 large mines are all within a 60-mile radius of one another in northern Appalachia, and 2 of these 3 routinely ship to both Baltimore and Newport News. It's important to point out that the total rail cost to move tons to Baltimore is virtually identical to the total rail cost to move tons to Newport News. Oftentimes, in fact, we view it as beneficial to ship to Newport News because of its larger coal yards, superior blending capabilities, and enhanced ability to load large vessels. Fortunately, there is excess capacity in Newport News with potential for relatively easy expansion, and it's good to have options. 3 times in the past 3 years, there have been significant disruptions in Baltimore, and in each instance, we've been able to redirect our volumes in short order. In summary, we can and will find other ways to get our tons into the market, which is why Maryland can't afford to render the Baltimore port uneconomic. I'll stop there, but stand ready to take any questions you may have.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corman. For the record, David Chenoweth speaking on behalf of the Baltimore Port Alliance. I also did register twice just in case. The Baltimore Port Alliance respectfully opposes Senate Bill 1088 for numerous reasons, similar to what you've just heard testimony on. The bill sends a clear statement that exporting coal via the Port of Baltimore is financially unfeasible. To put the impact of the bill is it will increase the port call of every single ship from $1.2 million to $2 million per shipment. Who is to absorb that cost? The supplier would obviously try to raise his coal price, but globally he cannot compete. That is not going to work. The Port of Baltimore is also a gateway into trade. This will affect the container business because if the coal ships stop coming to Baltimore, drawing the deep draft of 47.6, dredging gets hindered. When dredging gets hindered, these large container vessels that come in at 47 foot will not be allowed to transit. The Port of Baltimore, Maryland Port Authority would be hindered in trying to get funds to keep economy going in general. Keep in mind, coal is traded globally. As stated before, we're dealing with Asia, into Asia, Australia, Indonesia, things of that nature. There was a comment that was made some time ago that the tax would not impact coal in Baltimore to shift. That's clearly untrue. The tragic incident of the Key Bridge a year ago this month, in the first 24 days, 32 ships, 3.2 million tons of coal diverted to Hampton Roads. Do the math. It can go, it will go. I would just say in closing, it makes no sense. If you're trying to take dollars out of the port, this will certainly do that. Thank you.
Okay, we have questions. We'll start with Delegate Sharkoudian sitting in Delegate Stein's seat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the gentleman who just spoke, I'm sorry, I don't remember what organization you're representing. You talked about the cost and who pays, and I guess my question to you is, who do you think should pay for the externalities that's caused by coal being shipped through communities?
That's a very good question. I think there's a lot of it. I was speaking on behalf of the Baltimore Port Alliance, which represents about 250 maritime industries in the state.
Thank you.
I think you would have to really look at that overall. I couldn't answer that for you right now.
And I'll just say, like, fundamental economics 101 suggests that the producer of a good that causes externalities ought to pay for those externalities, and that is actually how we get the most efficient markets, right? And it's also how we make sure that we don't have state subsidies to private industry, which is what we have right now when our health system has to subsidize the coal industry, and our MDE has to subsidize the coal industry, and our residents residents have to subsidize the coal industry. So like fundamental economics are that you internalize the externality costs to the industry. And so I just wonder what other proposal you have that would be contrary to what what economists would generally agree on as to how one engages when there's an industry that has externalities.
Sure. I would answer that first by saying imposing a $13 per ton cost is going to take your coal business out of the state of Maryland.
So is it the price that you think we got wrong? Like, is there a different price that?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering if there's a different price that effectively internalizes those costs, or?
I'm not exactly sure where they came up with $13 a ton, to be honest with you. I can tell you the market can't bear anything,
Okay.
zero.
I guess the problem is the community can't bear anymore, but thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Boyce.
Thank you, and thank you, Delegate Charkoudian. Those were along the lines of my questions. And I guess the questions is, given, I understand you're talking about your markets and hearing the community concerns, what actually are you doing in general as it relates to mitigating the coal dust and mitigating fumes and mitigating harms to communities?
I spoke to the good nature of the Port of Baltimore as a whole. That question would be.
I'm sorry, this is for anyone on the panel.
Oh,
I
I'm
was
sorry.
not just instructing it to you, but you can answer as well.
I was going to flip it to them.
There you go. So, Madam Vice Chair, on behalf of CSX is currently in negotiations with the Maryland Department of the Environment on its the parameters that govern its coal transfer facility in Curtis Bay. So we're having those ongoing conversations. That is not a settled matter, and we're continuing to work with the community as well as MDE.
And do those discussions talk about whether it's covering or wetting or facilities, or what are those conversations to help us who don't know?
There have
what
been
those-
conversations along screens. Screens. Air screens.
And that is it? Is there anything else? Is there anything else CSX or any other company is doing as it relates to, I mean, I understand on one hand, for me, it's, I would say, one person said they're not moving out because this is their home, and yet CSX is not moving, people aren't moving. And so I guess the question is to a couple of the gentlemen who spoke, all men actually, spoke saying that there hasn't been such a relationship to say, these are the harms, like I'm cleaning my windows, I'm circulating dust out of my home, I'm putting up sealants so that dust can't get in. And so in regard to that, how does the company assist with those type of additional barriers for homes if they're not moving and you're not moving?
So again, all I can say at this point in time is that we are having ongoing negotiations with MDE.
I would certainly say that great efforts are taken at the ports to manage dust, to use water sprays to keep that dust from escaping the property. We believe those efforts are effective and in fact, highly effective, but certainly understand the ongoing conversation and need to continue that conversation. But we believe that great efforts are taken to control any of those impacts.
How do you measure that to know if it's working or not?
So there are measurements that are done, of course, that are being done. I can speak more to the Newport News and DTA, and there certainly are measurements that are taken. We constantly are monitoring those flows, the wind patterns. We are, in fact, again, watering intensively, managing those piles in every way we know how. We believe, again, that they're highly effective.
Thank you.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my questions are also for anyone on the panel, but probably more for CSX, but really anyone. And so actually, I was thinking along the same lines as Delegate Charkoudian, and she expressed it much better than I ever could, but I'm not an economist. So I really, you talk a lot about the cost, but who pays for the cost of the health care that these people need because as a result of this? Doesn't that fall on all of us?
So I would say this, and again, as I talked in my testimony, this is a federal issue, right? There is congressional acts that preempt any state from levying.
That wasn't my question, respectfully.
Well, but I think that it's maybe because railroads are governed by the federal government, that's more of a federal issue for them to explore.
But we, the citizens of Maryland, are paying more for health care and paying for the health care of people who we have heard are having these devastating impacts. So how do we deal with that and find the balance between that and ensuring business can continue?
I think that's an age-old question in terms of industrial areas existing by residential communities.
So are there any amendments to this bill that you would accept that would help to bring it along?
So I might add that, look, what we're trying to convey here is that this bill will move the business to Virginia. It will all move to Virginia. There will be no more coal moving through Baltimore based on this bill. If that's the case, there's going to be a very substantial economic impact to the state itself, because there are all sorts of revenues being generated from this activity that in fact can be used in a whole range of ways. All the services that the state provides across the full range of services that the state provides are enhanced because of these very, very substantial revenues. So I think that's the germane point that we're here to convey about this specific bill.
And we certainly appreciate the port, but I guess I'm saying there already is an economic impact. There is an economic impact that's hurting all of Maryland because of that.
But I would say there are multiple, I mean, there's $640 million of total revenue impact from coal activity alone that goes through the port. So it's a massive economic impact to the good that needs to be considered as well. It's a huge amount of revenue, and if that goes away, I think the state will struggle with many of these services that we're discussing.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the panelists for being here. So I have a question for whichever of you feels best poised to answer. It just so happens that while all of us here in this committee chamber represent all of the people of Maryland, when I go home to my constituents who I directly represent and have to explain to them why their children have to get tested for asthma when they're 3 years old, or why there's coal particulates on their windowsills inside and out. Those are folks that live in Brooklyn, Curtis Bay, and Lakeland and Westport. I represent the district, and I represent the people who live there. And when session ends, I have to go home and let them know what good work we did on their behalf. And so my question for you is, what would you say to your friends, neighbors, people who depend on you, who've asked you to help clean their air, and you didn't do so? How would you answer them? And this is really a personal question. Sometimes we talk about formulas and logistic regressions and analyses, but sometimes we just talk about human beings and our responsibilities to each other. So how would you answer that question?
So I would say it's important here. We have 100 people working at our port in Baltimore. Those people care deeply about that community. They care deeply about these very issues. 40 of those are ILA members. They're very engaged in these issues and managing the very thing we're talking about, which is the activity to make sure it's being done in a healthy way, in full compliance. They care deeply too. And so I think that we should consider that fact that these people who call the Baltimore area home are engaged in this activity in a way that they believe is responsible. So we can have the discussion around what else can be done. There was a discussion of screens, certainly something that we can continue to talk about, explore what are the possibilities, but they believe and we believe that the activities we're conducting are done carefully and responsibly and well.
Thank you for that answer. May I, Mr. Chair, quickly? So, sir, thank you for your answer. Would you live across the street from the coal terminus or want someone in your family to do so?
I think that's, of course that would be, I would have no concerns about that. I can't tell you about, I live in Pittsburgh, so I can't comment on that specifically, but of course I would have no concerns about that. Again, the people at our facility believe they're managing their business in an exceptionally careful way, and we believe that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just a reminder to my colleagues, after this, we have another panel, and then we have 67 more witnesses on 11 more bills, and a floor at 5 o'clock, which we'll come back and finish the bill hearings if we have to. Delegate Terrassa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that note, I'll try to be brief, but I guess I'm really upset about this conversation, and along the lines of Delegate Lewis, wonder if I hear one of you does not live there, but do any of the rest of you live in the Curtis Bay area?
No.
No. So my son happens to work in the very high school that Dr. Heaney mentioned, Ben Franklin High School. And I'd like to know, I'm very disappointed that you guys are saying we're in conversation now, but this has been going on for a very long time, and you know it. And what I'd like to know is, what do you think? You don't think there's any health concerns? Is that your statement?
I would comment on the fact that I do not live in the Curtis Bay area. I've been in the Port of Baltimore for 45 years. I've personally loaded 80 million tons of coal. I have stood on many decks of ships in Curtis Bay for hours and hours and hours.
But you don't live there?
No. Have I breathed in coal dust? Yes, ma'am.
And you don't have any concerns about the health? You guys, none of you address health.
So we have folks from our facility here in the audience, and they're there every day, 60 hours a week, probably many weeks.
I'm not asking if other people are being exposed. I'm asking if you.
But I'm saying that they who are here in this room feel confident in what they're doing. They don't believe do not have those health concerns. It's not to say I don't want to suggest that others shouldn't. People have their own views, but there is also, our people are also part of the community.
And Delegate, I would also add that these facilities are always operational in the confines of permits at the state and the federal level. So we are being overseen by regulatory agencies.
And you're sharing the data of all that testing that you're doing, and is that something you can provide the committee?
I mean, MD, that is of public records. I'm sure that Department of Environment.
Well, you can provide that.
I can call them, absolutely.
Yeah, it's disappointing not to hear more about the health concerns there. Isn't that so?
Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This really could probably go to anyone on the panel. So I represent a district that is adjacent to the port. I'm not right there, but I have many folks that live in my district that work at the port. So I'm, of course, always concerned about what potential health risk there might be out there. Could you tell me if port workers, specifically those that are kind of in this field around the coal piers, are they experiencing higher rates of asthma than what we might see kind of in the general public? Like, I mean, we're hearing about all these health risks. You would expect to see that those folks would have like extremely high rates of asthma since they're right there with the coal dust all the time. Is that what we're seeing on the ground?
So I would say there was a Senate hearing as well, and there was testimony from the ILA, and there was nothing but strong, opposition to the bill. No one was voicing concerns about that for their members. I think they don't believe there are those concerns. I think they believe these are great jobs and that they manage their work responsibly.
Okay, Mr. Chair, may I have one more? Thank you. So to follow up on that, what does workers' comp look like for you, right? I mean, are you experiencing more rates of workers' comp for these kinds of issues, for asthma, breathing problems, things like that, than you may see in a typical industry? I'm just trying to wrap my head around what it looks like. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you to this panel. We have informational testimony from Lisa Wanger from UMCES. Thank you. You guys are free to.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to provide informational testimony on HB 1088. I'm Lisa Wanger, a professor of environmental economics at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and I'm speaking on behalf of our research, not the university. My team analyzed whether the proposed coal transport fee had the potential to divert exports from Baltimore to ports in other states. And specifically—
Could you just pull the mic a little closer to your mouth?
I'm sorry. I was wondering if that was
Or pull yourself closer to the mic. That works too. Thank you.
How's that?
Better. Thank you.
So specifically, we examined the transportation costs of switching from the Port of Baltimore to the Port of Virginia, which has coal terminals in Norfolk and Hampton Roads. And they handled the coal during the Key Bridge collapse. So the analysis compared distances and costs under current conditions and if rail travel completely avoided Maryland, as would be needed to avoid the fee. And we have 3 key findings. 1, no diversions from the Port of Baltimore are expected for coal from the northern Appalachian region, which supplies most of the coal exported from Baltimore. If these mines switched to using the Port of Virginia, coal transportation distances would increase by an average of almost 600 miles, and the cost would increase by an estimated average of $27 per short ton. And that's more than double the $13 fee. Finding 2, the volume of coal coming from Baltimore from the central Appalachian coal region appears likely to be diverted to the Port of Virginia. This is thought to be a small volume because even without the fee, mines in this region have shorter travel distances and presumed lower estimated costs to use the Port of Virginia. Finding 3, increasing transportation costs could reduce coal export volumes from Baltimore if mines have to increase prices. Given that the $13 fee would be about 18% of the estimated $70 per short ton selling price of coal, the fee could reduce mines' competitiveness in the global market. Thank you.
Any questions for this panelist? Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask if you also studied what was brought up here about the possibility of the entire industry being abandoned and for someone overseas, another coal source.
I have not studied that, and it would depend on the market conditions of whether there were other suppliers available to offer coal at a similar price.
But you have not studied that?
I haven't analyzed that.
Thank you.
Okay. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, did you consider a scenario of less than the $13 per short ton figure that's in the bill, or did you just stay with that for your modeling?
Well, interestingly, perhaps just a coincidence, the minimum increase in cost to ship coal is $14 for the mine that would have the least difference between the 2 ports. So from our analysis, the $13 is always less than any mine's extra costs from diverting. But I think perhaps you're getting at, again, the market conditions, and that is not something we studied. It's an excellent question, though.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1088. Is Delegate Arakan here? Yeah. Great. I have bad eyes. House Bill 1258, Delegate Arakan, Energy Equality Act of 2025. And if you have a panel, feel free to bring them up.
Hi, y'all. For the record, Delegate Lauren Arkin here for House Bill 1258. I didn't drag a bunch of people down here because I knew we would have a lot of work to do today and I didn't want to burn through all of your time, but I did just want to have a conversation with you sort of on this topic broadly and talk
Delegate Arakan, do you want to just wait 5 seconds, let people clear out so everyone can hear you?
Yeah, your marble hallway's a little noisy. It's a little quieter than
I think that's actually our marble hallway.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a spicy committee. I didn't know. I thought just mine was. Yeah.
Please go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So again, for the record, Lauren Arkin, and this is HB 1258. Like I said, I didn't want to drag a bunch of folks down here today because it's a busy day, but I did want to sort of open the conversation with you guys about this issue more broadly. What my bill does is it essentially prevents the state from banning consumer products based on the type of energy source. So it would remove us from the Clean Car Initiative, but it would also allow us to continue to sell, things like gas-powered lawnmowers, things like that, home devices, things like that. This is a Freedom Caucus priority, but it's also something that I've heard a lot about in my community. And it's not just because people are sort of tired of the government saying what we can and can't buy, but it's also because of the downstream impacts on energy costs broadly. I know that a lot of us have been receiving copious amounts of communication from our constituencies all across the state about the cost of electricity, things like that. So this bill seeks to alleviate some of that further taxing of our current grid situation by allowing people the consumer choice to decide what type of energy production they are going to use for the different products that they use every day. So that's kind of like the first thing I want to mention. The second thing, and I know there's been a lot of discussion in the media lately about the Clean Cars initiative. I did want to just flag for you guys the effect in California that policy has had today is a $200 million loss in revenue through loss of the gas tax. By 2027, they estimate it will be $1 billion revenue loss for their state. And after it's fully implemented, about 5 years later, their estimate is that it'll be an $8.5 billion loss to their state in revenue through loss of the gas tax. And just more broadly, I see now, I have not spent a lot of time in this committee, but you guys actually work on some really weighty topics that have deep personal impacts on people. And so one of the things that has bothered me about the green movement is not, I think we all want a cleaner place to live. I feel the same way as you. I'm a mother of a lot of children, and I want them all to breathe clean air also and play in clean water. I mean, when I was a child, my mother would not allow me to play in surface water in the state of Maryland because back before the internet, she marched down to MD and said, "Where's the clean, safe surface water?" And they looked at her like she had 3 heads, and this was in the 90s. So I want the same opportunities that you guys do. But I do feel like some of the movement around limiting carbon and around specifically greenhouse gas emissions has taken our focus away from opportunities that we have as a state and a country to consider things that are hurting us right now, every day, like every time it rains and Back River Neck overflows into the bay. We are losing sight of things that we could do right now because we're focusing on windmills and banning cars and things like that. So my bill is simple, and I just wanted to open a conversation with you guys and just come here as the voice of District 7 and say, these are things my constituents care about. These are things that I care about, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. The Windmill Committee is actually Economic Matters, and
no, that's right.
we've never passed a bill banning cars. Delegate Foley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Delegate, thank you for being here. There are a number of jurisdictions in the state that have banned the use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers. So would your bill negate those ordinances?
Yes, it would preempt. Yes,
all right, so you're telling local jurisdictions that they can't make their own decisions about what they ban and what they don't ban.
Yes, ma'am. This would preempt them.
Thank you. And can I have one more, Mr. Chair? And my second question is, supposing that the rationale for banning something is because, for example, it causes damaging levels of noise, would this bill, because it's gasoline powered and it would be banned and there would be a safer alternative with respect to noise, and I am talking about leaf blowers, would this bill continue to ban any ordinance that restricts the sale or purchase?
It doesn't address that specifically in the language, but I mean, if you wanted to send it to a subcommittee, we could try to work on that. But I don't believe if your ban is related to something that is not specifically the form of energy that it might do it, but we'd have to get down to the nitty-gritty to figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I do not see any other questions, so thank you, Delegate. We'll call 2 favorable amendment witnesses, Louis Campion from the Maryland Motor Truck Association,
Thanks,
Joshua Fisher, Alliance for Automotive Innovation. Guys, please go ahead when you're ready.
Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee, my name is Josh Fisher with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. I appreciate the opportunity to present the automaker's perspective on House Bill 1258. We're encouraged by the sponsor's efforts to address this issue and bring balance to Maryland's new vehicle market. We also want to recognize Delegate Stein's bill, House Bill 1556, which takes a different approach to the same problem. We are committed to working with the sponsors, this committee, and the General Assembly to align these proposals in a manner that benefits Maryland residents, the state's new car dealers, and automakers. You've heard me say it before, but it bears repeating. The auto industry is fully committed to electrification. By 2030, we plan to invest $1.2 trillion globally. That's on top of the $123 billion already invested in the United States. Automakers are an important part of Maryland's economy, both through the port, which is the busiest U.S. on-off vehicle handling port in the United States, and through the approximately 300 new car dealers our members work with in the state. The bills this committee will debate today and tomorrow recognize Maryland's continued participation in California's ACC2 mandate will lead to market disruptions, less vehicles delivered to Maryland dealers, less vehicle choice for Maryland residents, higher prices for consumers, and less revenue for the state. Because of these looming price increases and less vehicle options, it's not surprising that our polling shows 62% of Marylanders oppose banning gas vehicles. The question is, what will Maryland do to avoid the significant disruption posed by the ACC2 rules? House Bill 1258 proposes a clear answer: withdrawal from the program. That is an approach that we would support. To those that question the automakers' commitments to EVs in Maryland's market, let me be very clear. Automakers will continue to deliver electric vehicles to Maryland's market, mandate or no mandate. The real question is the pace. The ACC2 rules are unrealistically ahead of the consumer and will result in regulatory failure if the state does not act now. So let's work together and find the right path forward. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Lewis Campion, Maryland Motor Truck Association, also with several dozen truck dealers in our membership as well. And I do want to thank the sponsor for the introduction and the sort of discussion around this bill that recognizes specifically the numerous hurdles that still exist for implementation of the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, which is really all I'm speaking to. I won't go over those because you have already afforded us the opportunity to give that joint briefing a few weeks ago. And all of these clean vehicle programs are very uncertain right now because of action at the federal level. But in lieu of an outright ban, we really want to encourage a look at the bill that you'll hear tomorrow, House Bill 1556, which essentially is a fine and penalty delay. And the reason why we suggest that this is a real opportunity is because we are trying to adopt electric trucks. We are trying to do that. There are numerous things that have to occur before that can happen regarding infrastructure and all of the investment that has to be made. And so we think that moving toward a model that provides certainty for the manufacturers around fines and penalties that still allows the state to try and move toward its environmental goals and pursue adoption of clean vehicles, whether that be cars and trucks, is probably the best approach as the market continues to develop. So with that, be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, I have an isn't that so homework assignment for you. I think Maryland, new car sales, about 10 to 11% are EVs. Could you get for the committee non-ACC2 states similar numbers? What are the new car sales EV percentage?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. We have an entire report that goes through Q3 of 2024, and that's on our website. Happy to provide it to you.
Great. Isn't that so? Thank you. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Campion, this question is for you. Can you remind me again what the numbers look like in California that has just implemented the clean truck requirement?
So California being the first state that has gone through a year of the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, the data from August of 23 to August of 24, sales dropped 79% in that 12-month period.
And if that were to happen here in Maryland, right, if we were to lose nearly 80% of our sales, what's the economic, what is that economic impact in terms of dollars? What do you think that looks like to the state?
So that's probably a better question for the dealers, obviously, but there's everything, obviously, from vehicle registration fees to titling taxes, all of which we contribute, right? What I don't have data on, and we could certainly try to look at, is, what ultimately happens from our members' standpoint is that they have to keep their vehicles longer. There's just not a choice for them because operationally you can't buy an electric truck if you don't have charging. And so if you don't have charging, you got to deliver product, right? And at the end of the day, we're delivering like 99% of the manufactured goods in this state. And so to that end, we need to continue to deliver. And right now that means primarily in a diesel vehicle with very rare exceptions.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Campion, just for my clarity, obviously you have more flexibility than a consumer in terms of where your vehicle is titled and registered, but there's some limits on that. I mean, even if you purchase the vehicle in Pennsylvania, if you're operating solely interstate in Maryland, you probably have to be titled in Maryland, is that?
That is correct. So if we have a location in another state, then under the international registration plan, we can title in any state where we have a physical location. But if you don't have a physical location, if your only location is in Maryland, that is where you are titling and registering.
Thank you for clarifying that. Any additional questions? Okay, thank you both. We're going to turn to some unfavorable in-person testimony. We have Brittany Baker from CCAN, Ramon Palencia Calvo from Maryland LCV, and Lindsay Mendelson from the Maryland Sierra Club. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Chair Corman, members of the committee, my name is Ramon Palencia Calvo. I'm the Deputy Director of the Maryland Eagle Conservation Board. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Maryland LCV strongly opposes House Bill 1258, which will repeal Maryland's Advanced Clean Car 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks regulations. The two programs are critical to protect public health and improve air quality in Maryland. Rolling back those programs means choosing more pollution, more respiratory illnesses, and greater health risks for our most vulnerable residents, children, seniors, and those with pre-existing conditions. Transportation is Maryland's largest source of ozone pollution, which is a leading trigger of asthma and lung disease. Without AC2 and ACT, Maryland will see by 2050 over 3,000 additional asthma attacks, 195 more premature deaths, over 15,000 lost work days due to pollution-related illnesses. Those impacts come at a real cost. MDE estimates that AC2 alone will save Maryland over $600 million each year by preventing respiratory and health illnesses and cutting down on lost work days. Maryland's air pollution crisis is not felt equally across communities. Air pollution disproportionately harms Latino and Black children who experience higher asthma rates and emergency room visits than their white peers. Black children in Maryland visit ER for asthma nearly 5 times more often. Repealing AC2 and ACT will worsen those disparities, deepening the health burden on vulnerable communities. Clean air is a right, not a privilege. Keeping those programs in place will cut vehicle pollution, protect lives, promote a healthy future for all, and ensure Maryland meets our climate goals. We urge you an unfavorable report on House Bill 1258. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lindsay Mendelson, and I'm the Senior Transportation Campaign Representative with the Maryland Sierra Club. We oppose this bill and any delay of the Clean Car and Clean Truck programs. I will make 4 points. 1, we have been part of the Clean Cars program since 2007. Maryland and other states have met the EV goals they set for 2025 ahead of schedule. 2, the Baltimore region and Cecil County are in serious non-attainment of the ozone standard. If we roll back this program, there is simply not a foreseeable way to cut ozone enough to meet federal air quality standards. These programs save lives and are expected to avoid thousands of cases of respiratory illnesses. 3, there are many flexibility mechanisms from credit banking to trading designed to make this program feasible. OEMs can also transfer excess credits earned in one clean car state to another clean car state. MDE has indicated that OEMs are significantly exceeding the standards from the previous phase of Advanced Clean Cars 1. Because of all the banked credits, OEMs will not need to change their production schedule or sell fewer vehicles in Maryland. 4, no state has delayed these standards. Delaying enforcement of these programs for even 2 years, which is being proposed by the bill tomorrow, is estimated to result in 200,000 less EV cars and 5,000 less EV truck sales in Maryland by 2050. Manufacturers will shift EV sales to other states, and consumers will lose out on more vehicle choice and benefits of extended vehicle warranties under the program. This is also unnecessary to delay enforcement because currently manufacturers have 3 years to make up any deficits if they fall short of the targets. So there is not even the possibility of any penalties for Advanced Clean Cars 2 until March of 2031, and MDE can adopt an amendment for this to apply to the Advanced Clean Trucks rule as well. Thank you.
Chair Corman, members of the committee, I'm Brittany Baker, Maryland Director for Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I'm really approaching my testimony today from a conceptual level, and I urge an unfavorable report on HB 1258. So just for the record, the purpose of moving forward with greenhouse gas reductions goals is to lower bills and stabilize consumer prices for the long term, improve public health, and prevent the worst impacts of our changing climate, which affect food security, wealth attainment, disease incidence, and other critical material unavoidable aspects of everyday lives. And so this bill, as drafted, especially the proposal that not only affects the Advanced Clean Cars and Trucks program, but also has ramifications for decarbonization of other sectors, is particularly would hold Maryland back in attaining greenhouse gas goals in many areas. And with that, I urge an unfavorable report.
Thank you. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Mendelson, you jammed a lot into your 2 minutes there. I wonder if you could just briefly expand on the flexibilities you mentioned, and I'm sure we talked about those last year in the hearings, but if you could just refresh my memory. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility, built-in compliance that actually the industry has agreed on in terms of the flexibility requirements. So first of all, manufacturers under the previous phase of the program in Advanced Clean Cars 1 have actually over-complied, meaning that they have a bunch of credits that they can use through model years 2027 to 2030. There's also credit pooling for Advanced Clean Cars 2. So states that have extra credits, OEMs can transfer excess credits earned in one state to another state. There's also early compliance credits where manufacturers can bank credits from early years before the program starts as well. And I also just wanted to reinforce the 3-year look-back provision. So under Advanced Clean Cars 2, again, manufacturers have 3 years to make up any deficits, and they will not be penalized until model year 2031. So there is no reason why we can't even let the manufacturers try to, meet these requirements if there's no penalties assessed until March of 2031. Also, I will mention that there are, MDE has discretion to apply their own penalties as well, so that varies by state to state.
Thank you.
Ms. Mendelson, you said something like no state has paused. What did you say about no?
Yeah, so no state right now has delayed implementation of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks rule. So if Maryland did decide to do that, we would be the first state of all the Section 177 states to delay.
Right, but aren't there several states that were part of what I'll just call Advanced Clean Cars 1, even though I don't think that was its formal name, that have not adopted it at all?
Yeah, there are states, I know that Connecticut decided not to go ahead and adopt, but I'm saying that for the Section 177 states that do.
I understand. I'm just asking,
yeah.
Were there other states that have previously been on California's standard that basically entirely opted out of California Clean Cars 2, at least thus far?
So I do know that under the change of administration, that Governor Youngkin did pull Virginia out of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 standard.
Okay, you mentioned
but not delay. That's different than delaying.
I understand. You mentioned Connecticut. Are there any others? Do you know what Minnesota did?
I can get back to you on the other states that have decided not to opt into Clean Cars 2.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any additional questions? Oh, yeah, there we go. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually sort of a follow-up to your question there, Mr. Chair. Can you just tell me how many states we're talking? What are we talking about? Like 30, 40 states? How many states actually are in the Advanced Clean Cars 2 that haven't delayed it?
Yeah, so I can give you I think there's 11 states, and just to make sure that I have the exact numbers here. So the states that have adopted the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule include California, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Delaware, New Mexico, Vermont, Rhode Island, and Washington, D.C.
So if my math is like 12 or 13 states, right? So we're not talking about like a majority of the states here. We're talking about 12 or 13, right? Just so I understand.
With the state of California, I think they all make up about a third of the U.S. car market. I can verify that exact percentage with you. I can follow up with you.
Sure. I'm not talking about car. I'm just talking about number of states, right? So we're not talking about a majority of states, right? That has clean cars too.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah, that's
Thank you.
About 11. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any additional questions? Okay, thank you. I believe that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1258. We'll turn to House Bill 1451, Delegate Chisholm, Climate Solutions Affordability Act. And if you have a panel or anything, please bring them up.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, honey.
Can you grab a chair and go to the side for one of our panels?
He doesn't let you do that. He makes them swap out.
I apologize. I skipped a virtual witness on that last bill, so sit right there, Delegate Chisholm, and let us call opposition witness Alex Casper, American Lung Association. I apologize for jumping ahead. Oh, they gave up? Oh, sorry. All right, Delegate Chisholm, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vice Chair, members of the ENT Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Brian Chisholm, here to present HB 1451, which is the Climate Solutions Affordability Act. Let's just cut to the chase. Everybody in here, and I mean everybody in here, and if you haven't, I don't know who's answering your phone, have heard from constituents saying their utility bills are through the roof. It's too expensive. They don't know what to do. We are inundated in our offices, or at least in my office, with people that are shocked, scared, mad about their utility bills, and they need something to be done about it. And so it crosses all lines. It is people on fixed income, people on low income, people that are dependent on medical devices that when they hit the switch, they expect the power to come on so they can have their life savings device. And it's a terrible situation we're in this state right now. And people are afraid of being left out in the cold. My background's in mortgage lending. I would tell you that there is no doubt, and it's undeniable, that people will pay their utility bill before they'll pay their mortgage, before they pay their rent, before they pay their lease, because they're scared to death of that power going out. It's a scary thing to everybody, all of us in here, but people that are on limited income, it's tough because they don't know what to do. It's a situation that I think everybody in here understands. We're going to have to address. The energy bills are skyrocketing, and there's no end in sight. Come June, there's another rate increase, at least in my area of BG&E. Although there's plenty of finger pointing and plenty of blame to go around, and there's a lot of players in this game. I've spent the last 2.5 years really getting into the energy industry to fully understand it. And I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp of it, but it really does just boil down to one thing: supply and demand. We are demanding far more than we're supplying in this state. We import 40% of our energy right now from outside of this state. That is projected to go to 80% by 2031 on this trajectory. That's a dangerous place to be. It's an expensive place to be, and it is environmentally damaging to run those transmission lines down all the way through farmland and other communities, and we lose power. The further electricity has to travel, it goes through what's called resistance, which means wherever it's coming from, whether it be Pennsylvania or not, they have to produce more of it, which is counterintuitive to what you're trying to do oftentimes with environmental policy. We've lost 7 plants in the last few years. We lost Charles P. Crane Generating, retired in 2018. We lost Dickerson Generating in 2020. We lost Luke Mill Power Plant in 2019. We lost Paul Smith Power Station in 2012. Morgantown Generating in 2022, Chalk Point in 2021, and Warrior Run Generating Station retired in 2024. That's a total loss of 6,000 megawatts. That is enough to provide energy to 4.9 million households. We have 2.3 in the state of Maryland. How can that be made up with just wind and solar, which I know is a big focus of this committee? Right now, as we sit, we produce 481 megawatts of solar and 85.5 megawatts of wind. That's a total of 566 megawatts total. That's a delta of 5,400. This does not include Brandon Shores, which is operating, which will now operate under a reliability must run, which means every ratepayer, every consumer in the state of Maryland is going to have to pay them to run every single day because of an agreement that Talent just made with FERC They were a peaker plant. They got paid when we had surges, and we were at capacity. Now we're going to pay them every single day. I think the total was the RMR could cost us $258 million annually, totaling up to $900 million by the end of the RMR, which is set to finish in 2028. Not to mention all the transmission lines that we're going to bring down from Peach Bottom from that nuclear power plant to replace Brandon Shores. Everybody has heard all the problems we've had with communities upset about all these transmission lines coming down from Peach Bottom. The original estimate 2 years ago was $863 million, if I remember off the top of my head. The last estimate I saw was $1.6 billion. We've all been around long enough to know that price is going to continue to go up just because of inflation and everything else that goes into it. We are currently the 4th highest migrated state out of in the country. UMBC poll from February of 2025, last month, said 53% of Marylanders have considered moving to a different state. 69% unaffiliated independent voters and 63% of Republicans have considered moving, compared to 40% Democrats. Either way, people are at a breaking point in this state. What are the primary drivers behind these closures? Environmental state policy certainly contributed to initial announcement shuttering Brandon Shores per a letter dated March 5th, 2024 to Chairman Wilson of the House Economic Matters Committee. It states, it was clear to observers that the state had adopted a policy to phase out coal generation quickly and the legislation would be reintroduced. Environmental groups, including the Sierra Club, continue to actively lobby campaigns in support of the legislation. In response to environmental demands and legislative pressure, Talon subsequently reached an agreement with the Sierra Club, which would require them to retire Brandon Shores so long as the plant was running on coal. The FERC Commissioner, Mark Christie, recently said power plants are retiring faster than they've been replaced. The arithmetic doesn't work. The United States is heading for a catastrophic situation in terms of reliability. Christopher Summers, the founder and president of Maryland Public Institute, recently said the loss of power poses a real danger to the well-being and livelihoods of Maryland families and businesses. Until these current risks to our grid are fully dealt with, it's a mistake to close reliable baseload power plants too soon. I've got a graph here that shows that we've lost 40 gigawatts since 2022, between 2022 and 2030 as far as retirement planning. And of that 40 gigawatts, 25 were attributed to policy. I began researching the best solution to try to help out with this a couple of years ago, as I said, because Brandon Shores is in my district. When I go to my in-laws' house, I am looking right at those stacks. I understand it's not pretty, but I also understand it provides a lot of power to people that need it. It was originally put there to feed Baltimore City. When we have these skyrocketing utility rates, they hurt the poorest among us the worst. People are scared. If they can't pay their utility bill, we only have so many programs to help the low-income people pay for their utility bills. I spoke to everybody in the last 2 years. I've been to PGM. I've talked to PGM on several occasions. I've had numerous conversations with PG&E to see what we can do to help. I've talked to Reliability First several times. I've talked to the PSC several times. I've talked to actual Michael Powell of Gordon Feinblatt to see what they could do. It's astonishing to me that nobody wants to take responsibility. Everybody wants to point fingers. So I asked myself, how do we provide a balanced, common sense solution that might mitigate all these negative impacts without undoing the legislative priorities many of you in this committee have worked so hard for? What's our biggest obstacles to lowering residential and small business power bills? What can I do to encourage affordable housing development? What can I do to support a thriving business environment? It kept coming back to one or two things. One was the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022. I simply want to provide an off-ramp and guardrails to keep us from heading straight into an inevitable disaster with the introduction of 1451. This is a pragmatic, necessary measure. It is a soft landing. It is an olive branch amidst increasingly unrealistic and unattainable energy transition. You just heard it in your last bill hearing. HB 1451 injects a fact-based reality into the ambitious regulations by simply adding to the bill to the extent economically practicable. Economically practicable is defined as to the extent feasible or capable of being done or carried out with reasonable effort, taking into account the state of technology, the economics of improvements in relation to benefits to the public health and safety, and other societal and social economic consideration. Who else uses this term? The Environmental Protection Agency uses this term, to the extent economically practical, in various regulatory contexts. This phrase is particularly relevant in the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which governs hazardous waste management. The EPA also uses it in other regulations, such as those under the Clean Air Act, where cost considerations are often implied or explicitly mentioned. In layman's terms, it says we will take measured approach within reason to ensure we are not flat out bankrupting Maryland residents and businesses throughout the state. Right now, we are basically saying we want you to get up on the diving board and jump into the pool without knowing there's water in the pool. We know now from some of the testimony, there's really not water in the pool. But we're saying this is the law, jump in the pool. And we have a lot of scared people out there because they don't need to jump in the pool. Let me give you a few examples pulling from the Climate Solutions Act now. Regulation number 1, Maryland must reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60% compared to 2006 levels by 2031 and require Maryland's emissions to be net zero soon after. An article in the National Pulse discusses a recent study that shows that enormous economic costs that would be imposed to hit net zero carbon dioxide emissions commitments by 2030, 2050 net zero climate targets would cost $275 trillion. Ironically, in 2023, the Port of Baltimore exported a total of 28 million tons of coal, making a 5-year high, and is the second largest coal exporter hub in the United States, accounting for 28% of total U.S. coal exports. Regulation number 2, requiring buildings 35,000 square foot or larger to reduce their emission by 20% by 2030. I know the BEPS hearing was very long, and for good reason. There are 2,135 housing buildings in Maryland that are over 35,000 square foot, collectively accounting for total floor space of 236,183,746 square foot. That will crush the affordable housing, which I believe one of my panelists will speak to. Regulation 3, requiring the electrification of state passengers and light-duty vehicle fleets. The previous national administration spent $5 billion on electric school bus program, which only yielded 60 buses in 3 years. If the feds couldn't make it even a fraction of this goal, why would Annapolis expect that we can do it? Regulation 4, requiring at least 75% of electricity purchased by Marylanders for state facilities must come from no or low carbon energy sources starting January 1 of 20. Yes.
So we have a rule, we don't time the witnesses, but we have 60-some witnesses left to go this afternoon, about 10 other bills. So can you please wind it up so we can get to your witnesses?
Yep, I can respect it. Can I just hit the last part, which is to remove Empower? I also put an amendment on the bill to remove Empower. Empower has spent $4.1 billion. It was a great intentioned bill originally. Since its inception, only 6.6% of the funds have gone to the limited or low-income people, and that was the trend again last year. Now we've changed the focus of Empower to switch people from natural gas heating systems to electric heating systems, which are the most expensive heating systems we have, and put the most pressure on the grid. I don't know why we're pushing for a program to push people to even higher electric bills. With that, due to my respect for your time, Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and conclude and turn it over to my panel.
May I start? Hi, my name's Paul Ellington. I'm here today on behalf of Salisbury, and we do support House Bill 1451. The Climate Solutions Affordability Act. But I'd like to state that by no means does that support come at the expense of the environment in our case. I'm a homeowner in Montgomery County, and we just don't have the population in Salisbury or anywhere on the Eastern Shore to rival that. And we also have the additional challenge of a number of our properties, our land is undevelopable because of critical areas. And with a lot of the I'm not going to call them mandates in a bad way, but a lot of the directives, we'll call them, from the CSNA, it requires local governments to comply with very stringent greenhouse gas standards. And with all these goals, they're commendable, but they're not always feasible within the fiscal and operational constraints of local government. The financial burden of retrofitting buildings, purchasing zero-emission vehicles, and meeting other requirements could be significant, particularly for smaller municipalities, even smaller than Salisbury. The bill's provisions requiring municipalities to report direct emission data to the state annually, starting in 2025, introduces additional administrative burdens without clear guidance or financial support. The lack of flexibility currently in the implementation timeline, especially for zero-emission vehicles, disregards the capacity of local governments to transition their fleets in a cost-effective and timely manner. So for these reasons, we're here to testify in support of HB 1451 because it offers local governments the flexibility to comply with implementation considering their local revenue. We're not asking for a waiver. We're simply asking for a third way or another way at a slower pace. Thank you.
DeWarren Claiborne, President and CEO of the Central Maryland Chamber of Commerce. We cover 7 counties plus Baltimore City. We represent 2.8 million residents and business owners. And the Chamber supports HB 1451 with amendments. We favor market-driven solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and at the request of our members, are seeking more flexibility in the development of required plans, regulations, and that cover buildings and businesses that they must follow and comply to. The current requirements for buildings to meet net zero emissions has significantly increased costs for both businesses, consumers, and it makes it particularly challenging for small businesses to comply. Small businesses, especially those that are in shopping centers and ground level retail spaces, will be directly impacted by these requirements. As building owners comply, they may pass on costs to tenants, forcing small businesses to choose between upgrading equipment or relocating. Some may struggle with compliance fees, and older buildings may lack the infrastructure to make required improvements. With the June 1st, 2025 date reporting deadline approaching, businesses are concerned about the high cost of retrofitting. For business owners, conversion costs are steep, while tenants may face rent increases. Businesses should comply with these requirements to the extent economically practical, but should not be penalized if they cannot. The Chamber believes that House Bill 1451 provides a temporary solution allowing the state to meet energy demand while giving technology time to catch up. Current law places an undue burden on small business owners. We respectfully request that you support the amendments for HB 1451.
Good afternoon. I'm Whitney Carriage, and I'm a third-generation owner of Admiral Cleaners, a local dry cleaning business. I'm here to express my strong support for House Bill 1451. While everybody recognizes the importance of environmental responsibility, it must be balanced with common sense solutions so that businesses and the economy are not damaged in the process. The Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022 has led to significant increases in utility costs, with Maryland residents and businesses seeing 2 to 3 times their regular bills. It is doubly harmful for businesses. In addition to bearing the weight of these increased expenses, we are also seeing decreased revenue as Marylanders' discretionary income shrinks and they reduce their spending, negatively affecting all industries. Marylanders are already burdened by a high cost of living, as Maryland ranked 7th in the country in this category prior to these increases. The dry cleaning industry lost 30% of its businesses in 2008, another 30% due to COVID. Our industry will likely be further decimated by these increased utility costs, causing more family-owned businesses to close. Those who are not small business owners may not understand the stress and incredible responsibility that we feel. Admiral puts food on the table for over 60 people, mostly women and children. I have a friend who owns an IT company. He told me that all of his employees have direct deposit for payroll, but he and his wife do not because there's not always enough money. As business owners, our ability to take care of our team members is compromised by these increasing costs. Small businesses represent 99.5% of all businesses in Maryland and nearly half of the workforce. Maryland already ranks 47th in the country in the cost of doing business. House Bill 1451 provides a reasonable stopgap until the appropriate technology and infrastructure can be implemented. I strongly urge you to protect small businesses, which are the lifeblood of the Maryland economy, and vote favorably for this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak today and for reviewing my written testimony that was submitted. My name is Rick Bremen, and I operate Atlantic Realty Group, which is a small family-owned business that owns and operates over 1,900 apartments in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. I'm here today in support of HB 1451, as this bill provides the common sense guardrails to ensure investments made to support requirements under the Climate Solutions Now Act are economically appropriate. Without the safeguards of this bill, the limited availability of affordable housing in the state will become even scarcer. We serve everyday Marylanders that cannot afford rent increases that are projected to be over $400 a month compared to where they are today as a result of the nearly $40,000 per unit in an apartment upgrade that will be required under the Climate Solutions Now Act. Our organization knows firsthand about what makes economic sense if we have completed several programs under the Multifamily Energy Efficiency and Housing Affordability Program. These programs needed to show that energy saved not only made sense for the renter, but also for the property owner. Programs like this made it possible for owners to share in the investment along with state funds. I use this analogy to show there is precedence in the economic feasibility of projects. Funding for energy efficient projects is limited and is expected to be limited due to state budget constraints and the decline in federal funding. Supporting HB 1451 provides economic certainty for multifamily providers like Atlantic, but also demonstrates Maryland can be business friendly at a time when costs, taxes, and fees are rising. For these reasons, I request a favorable report.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Schroeder, and I'm here today to support House Bill 1451. I stand before you not only as a concerned citizen, but also as a utility-scale solar developer. I'm not a lobbyist or a paid advocate, but rather one who risks his time and money to develop new renewable sources. The mandate in 2021 to have 50% of energy supply come from renewable energy sources by 2030 has proven elusive. Most utility-scale projects, which are the only way to have a chance of meeting these goals, take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to build. In addition, solar and wind are intermittent resources that strain the existing transmission and distribution systems and require upgrades that are expensive and subject to supply delays. The push to transition to renewable sources of energy has caused the closing of fossil fuel generation and an increase in our existing reliance on generation from out of state via the PJM interconnection. This has led to supply and demand issues that have raised the cost of electricity and dramatically increased capacity costs for our state. The PJM generation mix is astoundingly 30% efficient. Transmission and distribution losses dropped that efficiency to 28% for commercial clients and 27% for the homeowner. So what's that mean? The push to electrify our transportation and buildings has a perverse impact on greenhouse gas emissions. For example, an electric vehicle powered at home, its efficiency is 20%. The average gasoline-powered vehicle is 30% efficient. So the EV is 10% less efficient, which means we put more demand on the grid, we have to burn more fossil fuels to make up for the EV efficiency's loss. The same is true for buildings. While going all electric may remove the greenhouse gases in the Maryland region, it causes an increase in emissions to the region, which is ultimately worse for the environment. The proposed legislation would allow a pause in the drive to go all electric and allow us renewable generators the time to build out the infrastructure needed to achieve the goal of decreased emissions. If Maryland is to build an economy based on adding new industries such as data centers, low-cost energy must be a driver.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate it. Delegate Foley, questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for the sponsor of the bill. I heard, your concerns about energy and climate a reduction in fossil fuels. But on page 6 of your bill, you seem to say on line 11 that that you seem to give a waiver for paying prevailing wage on projects that, among other things, are funded by federal funds under the Public Utilities article, and also the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, or the Inflation Reduction Act, which requires prevailing wage to be paid. So I just wondered what that's doing in the bill.
It's in the bill because we're 50 out of 50 states in labor costs in this state. We are 44th as far as business friendliness. The only way out of this, if we want power plants to remain here and to stay here, we have to stop being so antagonist and hostile to businesses. That's why we have businesses leaving. And you can't just, look, I'm a free market guy. I'm all for solar. I'm all for wind. I'm all for anything. But when the government starts telling and mandating things to happen, you have exactly what we have right now, which is skyrocketing energy bills. You have people leaving here in droves, and we're not going to be able to solve the problem by pushing more mandates on top of a business and saying, you have to pay this prevailing wage.
Okay. Well, that wasn't my question, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, it's good to see you. My question is, what if we don't do this? What do you think happens if we don't, move your bill and make some of these kind of changes to state policy? What do you see happening here?
I think we're going to continue to see what we've seen, and it's going to continue to accelerate. We're going to drive up prices so bad that we're going to have people that have the ability to leave will leave. I really worry about the people that don't have the ability to leave. Most of us in this committee will stomp our feet and be upset about utility bills, but we'll make it work. There is a large portion of our population that can't do this, and we are trapping them and making them make very hard decisions on how they're going to use their dollars. And if we don't do something, I think that, you were here for the BEPS hearing. We just had somebody come in from the CAR committee. They said, they need more time. That's all I'm asking for is more time. Let's take a pragmatic approach to this. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. Didn't mean to steal that pun, but just slow things down, because right now, everybody's saying this is unattainable. The people that build affordable housing are saying we can't do this. People that manufacture cars and sell cars are saying we can't do this. There's a letter in here in favor of my bill from the school bus manufacturer, one of the biggest ones in the state. They're saying we can't do this. Can we just slow it down? And, we're going to continue to see amendment after amendment after amendment for people wanting to be carved out of this. I just wanted a broad stroke to say, listen, let's look at it the same way the federal government does. And I know Delegate Foley asked me a question about the federal government. Federal government is the one that sets environmental policy. And there's a reason for that. And the reason the EPA puts that language in is we can't just say, well, it's the law, we're going to make everybody do it. We don't care who we bankrupt. We don't care who gets their lights turned off. I think that's not good governance. And look, this is a bipartisan bill, in my opinion. I'm trying to help everybody. Democrat, Republican, just trying to help people be able to afford the utility bills that they see skyrocketing. And everybody in here knows, if they understand the PSC and BG&E, if you have BG&E, your bill's going up again in June. I'm sorry, but it is. And it's unsustainable. We can't continue on this trajectory. And so I worry that if we don't at least do something, there's a lot of bills, obviously, the chairman in economic matters understands. I've had several conversations with Senator Feldman over in EEE. They all understand, and they all have solutions, but all the solutions I see are down the road. They're 7 years down the road, and that concerns me. We don't have 7 years. We only have a couple years to try to fix this, to really save Maryland families, and so I appreciate the question.
Yeah. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you so much, Delegate. If it's okay, I'd like to call your virtual witness before we go with favorable with amendments.
Sure.
Is that okay? Mimi Schwartz, is she on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Absolutely. You can begin when you're ready. 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, members of the ENT Committee. My name is Mimi Schwartz, a concerned citizen testifying in support of HB 1451. Maryland residents are at the edge of their financial abilities, struggling under big tax increases and rising costs, many of which are because of strict mandates like the CSNA. Many are barely making ends meet, but the legislators seem bent on increasing taxes and having mandates that will increase our cost of living. We can't afford to stay in Maryland, but we don't want to leave, although many are. Maryland is the 4th highest exit state. CSNA, we don't even know how it can be done, but we're pushing forward regardless of how it hurts Marylanders. Our aggressive climate goals have caused local producers to close, so we have fewer sources, each providing bigger percentages of our power. If one of those transmission paths has a problem, and it's more likely since it has to travel so far to get to us, people could die for lack of electricity. Each of your strict mandates costs someone. Plants are closing because they can't afford to produce due to stringent regulations, but our demand is going up. You know what that does to prices. And now consumers will be paying more for Brandon Shore's fuel because we have to pay them to stay open. Ratepayers will also have to pay for the new transmission lines. Local governments will likely need to raise taxes in order to implement their new requirements. And when buildings have to retrofit, that will mean higher costs for the low-income housing renter, Walmart shopper, and grocery store shopper, among others. Amend CSNA, adding to the extent economically practicable. Thank you, and please give HB 1451 a favorable report.
Thank you so much, Ms. Schwartz. Delegate, I'm going to call up your next favorable with the amendments, who's virtual, and then if I can have the favorable with amendments, Faith Loudon, to come to the panel, if that's okay. Is Faith here?
Someone just switch out with Faith.
And if we can pull up Anthony Kowalski, virtually, favorable with amendments. Are they here, Anthony? Okay, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You can begin.
Thanks. I'm having a little audio difficulty. Sorry.
Well, we can hear you, so you can go ahead.
Okay, great. I was asked to testify regarding the Empower Maryland program, which I've used extensively in the last 10 years. I'm a certified energy manager through the Association of Energy Engineers, and I've used the program both on the commercial side and the residential side. And I had an amendment for the Empower Maryland program that would have a moratorium or end the program for the G account tariff, which is mostly residential. I found that the latest audit of Empower showed that the return on investment for every dollar that's put in from the residential Empower charge, we get approximately $2 in savings. So it's really $1 in savings on top of what we put in. And it turns out that most residential users don't take advantage of the program. And when they do, as I've helped many people in my neighborhood do this, they get a rebate on a heat pump or a insulation installation or a hot water heater that's a hybrid hot water heater. And these rebates are great, but very few people have the ability to take advantage of them. And we're seeing the rebates actually skew the prices of hot water heaters and skew the prices of heat pumps, especially high efficiency heat pumps, which everyone wants, but are getting so expensive. The rebates don't seem to help as much as we thought originally in the program. So,
Thank you so much, Mr. Kowalski. That's unfortunately your time, but thank you for that interesting information.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. You can stand by in case there are questions. Ms. Faith Loudon, you may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corman and Vice Chairman Boyce, and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Faith Loudon. I live in Pasadena, Maryland. As a retiree, I'm on a fixed income. I'm feeling the weight of these rising utility bills more than ever. Since my husband passed, I'm the only one left to pay these bills, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to manage. I understand the desire to reduce emissions, but lawmakers should have ensured that the market and the technology were ready first before requiring such mandates. It feels like you put the cart before the horse, and here we are. I support all energy sources, including renewables, but the reality is that we're losing reliable energy production, and at the same time, our demand is only increasing with further electrification. This mismatch between supply and demand is driving my utility bills higher, and I simply can't afford it. That's why I support HB 1451 with amendments. This bill offers much-needed reprieve by giving the state more time to balance our energy needs while technology catches up. It would also eliminate the Empower surcharge on my bill, which I don't benefit from, and if removed, would save me money that I can put toward my prescriptions. Utility prices are already too high, and many of us, especially seniors like me, are struggling to keep up. HB 1451 is a step in the right direction, offering relief to those of us who are feeling the pressure and giving others the time they need to find a more balanced approach to our energy future. Thank you, and please, please support HB 1451 with amendments.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for the favorable with amendments witnesses? If not, sure, Delegate Jacobs.
See my light flashing. You got to see the light. If we can generate something. We're trying to generate something, that's what it is. Mr. I think it was Kowalski, is he the consultant?
He's the one.
He was a virtual. I got a question for him, I think. He's still with us?
Yes.
There he is. Mr. Kowalski, can you elaborate on what further electrification will do to our grid?
Sorry, the question again?
Can you elaborate on what further electrification will do to our grid?
Well, the grid in Maryland, the PJM grid operator is facing issues with organizations like the airport, Fort Meade, NSA, and a number of other off-takers who at any given point in time use more power in Maryland than any other user. So the grid is subject to brownouts, but usually that doesn't happen because they do voltage drops and other strategies to try to preserve the integrity of the grid. So any any further electrification load, any further loads, like huge data centers or huge industrial operations, will further strain the grid, especially for residential customers who are usually the ones affected by voltage drops and brownouts and other frequency fluctuations on the grid. Hospitals are particularly affected, and anybody that uses a lot of computers, when you have frequency problems on the grid, it affects electronic equipment. And of course, the grid operator knows this, so they try to keep the voltages and the frequencies on the grid within tolerances. As more and more loads go onto the grid, we face the challenge of supplying more and more power. And our peak loads, especially during the summer and in some cases in the middle of winter, these peak loads have the most potential for causing brownouts on the grid. And this, usually in July and August, we face these problems. So the grid right now is stable but precarious because our air conditioning loads in the summer are creeping up more and more. So we are at a turning point that requires a lot of new power sources. And of course, the price of electricity is determined by natural gas primarily. Natural gas prices have gone up quite a bit, so that has affected the generation of electricity on the grid using natural gas turbines to generate power. So there's a relationship between gas prices and electric prices that is a direct relationship on the PJM grid area. I hope that answers your question.
That was quite comprehensive. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I want to make sure I see the light. Okay. With that, I would like to call up the last person in the panel at this point is unfavorable. In person, Patrick Crump.
Madam Vice Chair, did you have a Jorge Rivera?
Nope. Let me double check. No, sir. No, not at all.
I don't know why they didn't.
Not written in. I can double check with committee, but there's no, there's no name on there.
I'll have them submit written testimony.
We'd appreciate that. We'd like to have it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Patrick Crump. Okay, last call, Patrick Crump. Okay. That ends the hearing for HB 1451. Calling up now HB 1484, requirements of public participation in impact and burden analysis, cumulative harms to environmental restoration for improving shared health, Cherish Our Communities Act. Delegate Lewis, J. Lewis, I should say, here in this committee. And if you have a panel, you can please bring them up.
Thank you.
There you go. All right, here we go. All righty. Chair, Vice Chair, for the record, Delegate Jazz Lewis on behalf of House Bill 1484. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Cherish Our Communities Act. This bill is about fairness, justice, and ensuring that all Marylanders, no matter where they live, no matter what they look like, can breathe clean air, drink clean water, raise their families in a safe and healthy environment. For too long, we've seen a pattern, one that's all too familiar. Some communities bear the brunt of pollution, while others remain largely untouched. It's not an accident, and it's not by coincidence. It's a result of policy decisions about where to place heavy industry, where to allow polluting facilities, and who gets a say in how those decisions are made. And more often than not, those communities facing the greatest environmental burden are communities of color, low-income neighborhoods, and working-class families of all backgrounds, particularly along the I-95 corridor. House Bill 1484 seeks to change that by ensuring that Maryland prioritizes environmental justice when determining whether to approve new or expanded facilities in overburdened and overpolluted communities. It does this through 3 key reforms. The first is the Environmental Burden Report. Under this bill, MDE must assess the cumulative environmental impact when reviewing permit applications for facilities that emit pollution. Specifically, if a proposed facility is located in a community that already has a high EJ, environmental justice score, a measurement that factors in air quality, water pollution, and public health indicators, then MDE will be required to produce a burden report before approving the permit. This report will provide concrete data on how the proposed facility would affect public health, air and water quality, and environmental safety in that community. With this report in hand, regulators and the public will have a fuller picture of the potential harm of that a project could bring. The second thing is that it strengthens the authority of MDE. Currently, the Maryland Department of Environment does not have explicit authority to deny permits based on a community's existing pollution levels. This bill changes that. It empowers MDE with the option to deny permits when a facility would contribute to excessive pollution and create further public health risks, either when expanding their facilities or upon renewal of existing permits. And third, it gives us an option to hold industry appropriately accountable. One of the biggest problems in our current system is that the communities most affected by pollution often have little to no say in decisions that impact their health and their safety. House Bill 1484 requires that before a permit is approved in a highly polluted community, there must be a transparent public engagement process. This means residents will have a formal opportunity to voice their concerns, access environmental impact reports, and hold companies accountable before a decision is made. This is not an abstract problem. We already know which communities suffer the most of this pollution. Studies have shown that areas along the I-95 corridor, including Baltimore City, Prince George's County, parts of Anne Arundel and Montgomery counties, even up to Harford County, have significantly higher levels of air pollution and public health risk than other areas of the state. Residents in these communities are more likely to suffer from asthma, health disease, cancer, and other pollution-related illnesses. I recognize that implementing this bill requires thoughtful collaboration with MDE and stakeholders. That is why we are actively working on amendments to streamline the bill's implementation, reduce the fiscal note, and ensure that the coalition supporting this bill is bought into the changes so that Maryland can lead on this issue. The bottom line is that this bill is not about stopping development or industry. It's about ensuring that when growth occurs, it occurs responsibly, and that no community is sacrificed in the name of progress. For these reasons, I urge a favorable report on House Bill 1484. Thank you.
Got it. Good afternoon. I'm Frederick Johnson, policy analyst for the Center for Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health, Empowering Communities, also known as CENC. Given the recent rollback of environmental justice protections under the new executive orders, it is now more important than ever for Maryland to codify a law to tackle the cumulative impact of environmental hazards and related pollution. According to the EPA, cumulative impacts are defined as the totality of exposures to combinations of chemical and non-chemical stressors and their effect on health, well-being, and the quality of life outcomes. These include both contemporary exposures as well as historical stressors over the course of one's lifetime. It is no surprise that cumulative impacts are more often found in low-wealth communities of color, where overlapping threats like factory emissions, traffic pollution, and toxic landfills create a much greater risk of harm to the health and quality of life of local residents. In Maryland, many communities face a barrage of pollution sources. Maryland EJ Screen, the state's first EJ mapping tool developed by Dr. Wilson at the University of Maryland, found that Bladensburg had an EJ score of 0.99 when compared to the rest of Prince George's County, as well as a plethora of concrete, block plants, and auto body shops. The tool also identified Maryland EJ Screen score for environmental parameters such as particulate matter, ozone, and traffic proximity to be in the top 10th percentile for Langley Park when compared to the rest of the state. Langley Park, one of the communities that will be served by the incoming Purple Line, is a multicultural community composed of over 80% Latinos with household incomes that are 83% lower than the rest of Prince George's County. Curtis Bay, home to the country's largest medical waste incinerator, a trash incinerator, and nearly 70 facilities permitted under the Clean Air Act, has been found to have the highest EJ score in the state, which means it has the worst burden of environmental justice. Across the country in states like New Jersey, New York, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and Colorado, there are multiple different. With that being said, we urge for your favorable report. I'll be respectful of the time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today and considering the voice of our community in this critical discussion. My name is Ana Rodriguez. I serve as a pastor at the Ministry with Power from on High in PG County, Langley Park. Our church serves and helps the community and the people, offering the spiritual nourishment and the support when they need it. We're there to support the community, and we are there to help them, their well-being and heavenly depending on the local environment. As a pastor, I have witnessed many health issues with the pollution and the families in this community. Many of them are struggling with asthma and other respiratory issues due to the environment factor. Not to mention that the stoves have not yet transitioned to electric versions, but also from the nearby buildings and factories. In the community of Langley Park, there is an ongoing construction that contributes to the pollution in the area. The continuous operation of these activities release emissions that seep into the air we breathe. We require your attention to enforce not allowing facilities to operate without proper accountability. The negligence leaves our community exposed to persistent pollution and health side effects. We're urging those in power to revise and strengthen the system to be guarding our health and our environment. Passing the CHERISH Act in our community is vital to strengthen the public participation and ensuring that the new pollution will not be added to our community while existing pollution that can be addressed. Our community needs and deserve protection that safeguard, and not just the families, but the future generations that want to call this place a home. We need to unite for a change and hold on to the hope to a better tomorrow. I thank you so much for your attention. God bless you.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee. My name is Carlos Sanchez. I'm here because unfortunately Mr. Middleton had to leave, but I'm here testifying in support of this bill. My name is, again, Carlos Sanchez. I was born and raised in Lakeland in South Baltimore, and as a resident of Baltimore City and a member of the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, a grassroots nonprofit organization, we're here in support of the CHERISH Act. For too long, communities have had the responsibility not to do the research and to turn that research into action to address the community impact from each facility in our communities. This bill was created from decades of ignoring the problem that communities across the state of Maryland have been overburdened with toxic air, water, and land pollution. So myself, alongside others, decided it was time to roll up our sleeves and create a meaningful and effective policy to address these community impacts, to establish a long-needed protections for these communities, protections that were needed back in 2011 when a group of students had to take matters into their own hands to fight a proposal for the largest incinerator in the world to be built less than a mile away from their school, Benjamin Franklin in Curtis Bay. That's the same school I graduated from. And although it wasn't built in Curtis Bay, it was built in Fairfield, which is less than a mile away from their school. And for these are the reasons that, protections like the CHERISH Act are for those communities to fight against the community impacts and to establish a long-needed change. And so for that, I urge you to stand with the community members and communities across the state of Maryland who need this protection and pass a favorable vote for Cherish Our Communities Act. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Delegate Lewis. I have Rebecca Rear also on your panel. Is that right? Delegate J. Lewis. I apologize to Delegate R. Lewis.
Thanks, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, members of the committee, Rebecca Rear, Maryland LCV. HB 1484, the Cherish Our Communities Act, is a Maryland LCV and environmental community priority. This bill addresses a gap in the Maryland Department of the Environment's permitting authority, equipping them with tools to more fully protect community health. Coalition testimony has over 40 organizations from diverse sectors in support. The coalition is in conversations with MDE on amendments. MDE's testimony details the importance of environmental justice in permitting decisions. In recent years, Maryland has made progress on environmental justice, developing an EJ mapping tool and including an EJ score in some permit applications. But we have fallen behind other states in implementing meaningful laws that give regulatory agencies authority to make permitting decisions based on this information. A couple points to emphasize. First is permit renewals, which should be treated differently than new permits, but are the only way to address existing pollution sources in overburdened communities. Including permit renewals is key to addressing existing burden in communities. Geography is also important. The 1.5-mile radius around census tracts with a high EJ score is critical for including industrial areas where permits will be submitted, but where people have been displaced. With no people in the census tract, the EJ score will be low. So proposed permits won't trigger the important additional analysis in this bill, even though they are very close to where people live in high EJ score census tracts. Finally, I want to draw your attention to stories from Chispa Maryland promotoras in our written testimony. Maryland LCV's vision is a healthy environment for everyone in Maryland. Chispa Maryland is celebrating 10 years this year, and promotoras sharing their stories about living near multiple sources of pollution and resulting health impacts are the reason we're here. Thank you, and we urge a favorable report on HB 1484.
And Delegate Jay Lewis, I also have Jennifer Coons, virtual witness on your panel. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. Jennifer, go ahead if you can hear me.
Yes, I'm trying to get my camera on. There we go. Thank you so much. Jennifer Kunze, representing Clean Water Action. I'm a District 45 resident in Baltimore City, and I am here for the purpose of talking about the elephant in the room, the fiscal note. So the coalition behind the Cherish Act developed the bill led by frontline communities and leading on lessons learned from bills that have successfully passed in New York, New Jersey, and Minnesota to cover important types of facilities, types of permits, and geographic areas. And the community-driven nature of these priorities is really important to maintain. We also understand very well the fiscal predicament that the state is in. So in the past 2 weeks, the coalition has worked very hard to develop options that streamline the bill's implementation and reduce its cost to implement significantly, that do not leave communities that need these vital protections behind. You'll find those detailed in your packet. And to summarize, they include things like reducing the number of reports required for the bill from 2 to 1, completely eliminating the requirement for MDE to edit and produce a final report. Instead, it would focus on information required from the permit applicant and on public comment to lead to a decision. Eliminating what had been required review from other governmental state bodies and local governments, eliminating coverage of most general permits while maintaining it for types of permits that are our priorities for overburdened communities, and simplifying the public review requirements that this bill very critically adds for permits that are important to EJ issues but not already subject to required public review. We believe these changes can very significantly reduce the fiscal note while maintaining the bill's coverage and the strong protective conditions that are already being implemented in other states. We shared these amendments with the department in late February, and I'm very happy to be sharing them with the committee and happy to answer any questions about these potential amendments as we work together to arrive at a successful and strong bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some questions. We'll start with Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Delegate Lewis, I'm reading the bill on page 4 on line 29, and I'm just curious as to why you included CAFOs in this particular legislation.
Sorry, say again. You mean the animal feeding operation? Yes. Is that the line you're referring?
We call them CAFOs, but it's concentrated animal feeding operations.
Just making sure I get the lingo right. So this bill was built largely with the support of frontline communities. So I think I will defer to the panel if they want to clarify.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for the question. I think you'll find, and we have a couple of public health experts from Hopkins coming up on future panels who can also expand on the answer. But the frontline communities on the Eastern Shore wanted to make sure that large animal feeding operations in particular were included in the bill as they experience various concerns around air pollution and their lived experiences raises concerns around including CAFOs in special consideration when it comes to things like an existing burden report covered in the bill. I would point out that the only permits that would fall under this bill would be ones that are applied for in high EJ score census tracts. So if you're applying for any permit in the state, including some of these permits outside of a high EJ score area, they wouldn't be subject to the additional review in the bill.
So is your goal to limit or eliminate CAFOs? Is that what your goal is?
No, the goal of the bill is to promote healthy businesses and a healthy economy in Maryland for the people living in high EJ score communities who currently experience high burdens of air pollution from various sources, water pollution, noise pollution, because they just live near a lot of industrial areas. So I know that's the goal of the bill is really to make sure that to add additional protections for health in communities that live near a lot of industry and facilities.
Sounds like you're trying to put somebody out of business.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Given the changes in the federal government that have removed any reference to environmental justice, and if I'm not mistaken, their EJ screen tool is no longer online. Given all those changes, would you say that this is more important than ever?
Yes, and I'm sure the department will come behind us. I think they are in the process of working to make the EJ screening tool that we have at the state go live again. They downloaded a lot of the information that they shared with the federal government in anticipation of this. So yes, it's critically important.
You're good. Okay. I see no further questions for this panel, so we will invite up Greg Sawtell, Community of Curtis Bay Association, David Jones, CCBA, Patrick Crump, MEPPN, and Emily Rudo, Environmental Law Clinic of University of Maryland, Carey School of Law.
So again, my name is David Jones. To your question, sir, we're not trying to put anyone out of business. We're trying to protect people from industries and businesses that are bad actors, people who don't want to do the right thing. We're not going after the mom and pop farms that are producing the food for us. We're going after big companies who are polluting and getting away with it because they can hide behind federal guidelines, as you could see from CSX when they were sitting here. We're asking Maryland and you guys to pass this bill because it gives Maryland more power over Maryland to make decisions for the people that you have been put in positions of power to represent. That's what we're asking for with this bill. Again, nobody's life is worth any dollar amount. It's just not. And for anyone to say it is it's a travesty. It really is. I'm not trying to take money out of anyone's mouth. You know, I know people need, money to live, but what is the cost really worth to a person making that money? And if you're a good stand-up company and you have good business practices, you're going to thrive. That's a bottom line. We're not asking to take anything from anyone. We're asking to have more restrictions on the companies who are not being held to the even minimal standards that they have right now, because they don't. They know that they can hide behind these things. Case in point, the largest medical waste incinerator in the country is in my neighborhood. 4 years they polluted. They were caught. $1.7 million is all they paid. That's a drop in the bucket to what they pulled in for those 4 years. CSX just paid out the same amount to my community because they don't want to pay a dollar above it, because then it opens them up to have to pay the right amount of what they've done to my community and several other communities. So please, this has nothing to do with taking away people's livelihoods. It has to do with saving people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg Sawtell, board member of the Community of Curtis Bay Association. Good to see you all again. And just echoing what Mr. Jones just said, earlier today in this committee hearing, you saw what we're dealing with on the ground. We're elected representatives in the community in South Baltimore. And so we're dealing with right now in Curtis Bay alone an influx of at least 5 permit applications, renewals, expansions, and even new facilities in Curtis Bay. And we're asked to stand by and safeguard the public health of community members. And we've seen that concern echoed with questions on this committee. But imagine if you're in our situation and you're trying to answer that question on top of open air coal terminal across the street, a medical waste incinerator, hundreds of trucks going by every day. It's an incredibly difficult technical challenge. And what you didn't hear CSX say earlier is what they often do to the community is they blame their externality, their pollution on all the other facilities. Because our regulatory system has a huge loophole, and that's how we've gotten into this situation. It views every facility in isolation. We understand that, but it fails to account for the fact that pollution adds up. One coal terminal and a medical waste incinerator add up to more, but our regulatory system does not recognize that. So that is a problem. We cannot deny that it's a problem. We're experiencing it on the ground. The question is, what's the solution? We've put down a framework, which is in good faith, a step forward to try to find a solution to this. And we are working diligently with the Maryland Department of the Environment, both on this bill, but also, honestly, the community is now taking on the role of doing the monitoring, doing the research, and even in sometimes pushing for the enforcement. The reason that that medical waste incinerator is paying those penalties is because community members have had to take it upon themselves to monitor the facility. We're filling a huge gap here, and we're just pleading for help. We need help on the ground to make this a community that can thrive and in a business environment that can thrive. So if there's any sense here that we're trying to do something that's anti-development or anti-business, it couldn't be further from the truth. We all need, workers need a healthy environment to work in as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairwoman, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Emily Rudo, a student attorney at the Environmental Law Clinic at the University of Maryland Carey School of Law, expressing the views of the clinic and not the University of Maryland system. For over a decade, the clinic has worked closely with environmental justice communities across Maryland, suffering disproportionately from the cumulative health and environmental impacts of state permitting decisions. I want to tell you about one such community my fellow clinic students and I are working with now. This community deals with blasting from an industrial site situated in their residentially zoned neighborhood pursuant to a state conditional permit. Residents deal with not just their homes deteriorating, but also their health. Dust from the site coats their homes, their outdoor furniture, and play sets. When compared to areas a little bit further from the site, air quality at residents' homes is significantly worse. One resident used to run marathons, but now deals with serious health complications preventing him from his passion. Some residents even moved into the neighborhood without knowing the industrial site existed until they felt their home shake from a blast. The first time I visited the neighborhood, I experienced one. Just feeling it once was unsettling. I can't fathom it as part of my daily life. This community and others the clinic has worked with over the years would have benefited and would still benefit from the safeguards and added transparency the Cherish Act would provide. Other states have implemented similar laws to this. We need laws on the books, not just policies that change with administrations. We now see firsthand the need for Maryland to step up and serve as a model and lead when the federal government is rolling back environmental justice protections. The Cherish Act ensures overburdened and underserved communities do not suffer disproportionate harm in perpetuity. For this reason, and those stated by others on the panel, the University of Maryland Environmental Law Clinic supports HB 1484 and requests a favorable report. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Phil Reynolds. I'm here representing Patrick Klump and the Maryland Episcopal Policy Network. I retired after about 35 years in the UN working in the environment, a little bit familiar with these issues, and they're very important for me. Global climate change is not just a scientific concern or an environmental issue, but it's what the United Nations calls a defining issue of our time at a defining moment. The Episcopal Church affirms that no community, especially communities living in poverty, should bear the heaviest burden of environmental pollution or degradation. We view the Cherish Our Community Act as an important environmental justice initiative because it will give the Maryland Department of Environment clear authority to consider environmental justice when making permit decisions on those applications targeting communities with high environmental justice scores. By examining the cumulative impact of new permanent applications on those communities already overburdened and underserved, the state can require those permits that would increase pollution to include strong pollution mitigation measures. The bill will also enhance public accountability by requiring meaningful community engagement and public notice for those permits impacting these communities. The Episcopal Diocese of Maryland urges the Environment and Transportation Committee to support the Cherish Our Communities Act as an important step towards protecting our most vulnerable and overburdened communities from bearing yet more pollution burdens. Thank you.
Thank you. I do not see any questions for this panel. We have additional in-person favorable testimony. Matthew Alberg, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Christopher Heaney, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Karen Russ, MD-PHA. Natalie Exum, Johns Hopkins University.
Good afternoon again. My name is Chris Heaney. I'm an associate professor of environmental health and engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Interestingly, I can say I am not just here as an individual today testifying. What I represent and bring, and I refer the testimony that we submitted on behalf of the Environmental Justice and Community Partnerships Committee of Johns Hopkins University, is an official endorsement of Johns Hopkins University as an institution for the Cherish Our Communities Act. In all my over 10 years at Johns Hopkins, I'm not aware that this happens very often. And I think this reflects something very unique and an incredible opportunity, which is reflected by the community and diverse coalition that you've seen who are bringing this incredible piece of legislation in front of you. You've got fence-line communities, you've got people from fence-line communities who've teamed up with academics to try to plug the holes in the dam that you heard from Mr. Saltel. How do elected local neighborhood officials answer accountability questions about how to keep people safe in their own communities? And they've teamed up with academics like myself and others that you're going to hear from. I also think the opportunity that we're in is not new. It is nothing new that environmental health promoting legislation, as debated, is going to be accused of being a job killer and economy killer. The Clean Air Act, when it was initially debated, it was going to kill the economy. It was never going to be possible. $2 trillion in benefits, $89 billion in costs, 30-to-1 ratio. When you just think of asthma, as we were talking about all day, about the cumulative impacts just of air quality and impacts on asthma in 2019 in Baltimore alone, estimated $23 million in emergency costs, room costs because of asthma. 71% of those costs are borne publicly. It's a 10-to-1 ratio to the fiscal note, which other people in the coalition have addressed that could be brought down. So we highly encourage a favorable review of the Cherish Our Communities Act. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Karen Russ. I'm a registered nurse and a member of the Maryland Public Health Association. I'm also a faculty member at the University of Maryland School of Nursing, but I'm here representing the Maryland Public Health Association. We've heard a lot today about the health effects of pollution, particularly air pollution, and its effect on asthma and the high rates of asthma in our state. I wanted to address a somewhat different problem, and that is maternal child health. So I have been a labor and delivery nurse, an obstetric and neonatal nurse, and formerly at one point in my career, I was the national coordinator for reproductive health for this nonprofit called Collaborative on Health and the Environment. So I've studied this extensively, and I wanted to be sure that the community is aware that there are really negative effects of air pollution, particularly particulate matter, on developing fetus and on the person who's carrying that fetus. So not to get too wonky, but just imagine, if you will, you've heard a lot, I'm sure, through many bills about particulate matter. Particulate matter 2.5 means that that little tiny bit, usually of carbon, is a 2.5 micron. So if you imagine what a millimeter is, a micron is 1/1000th of a millimeter. And what that means for this purpose is when someone inhales particulate matter, it can be transferred from the lungs into the bloodstream, in this example, through a placenta and into a fetus. And that can lead to these high rates of preterm birth, infant mortality, and maternal mortality, which we know are high in our state, higher in our environmental justice communities, like in Baltimore City, and a problem that is also very costly that can be affected at our state level with the serious cuts to Medicaid that the state is anticipating this year. So for all these reasons, I strongly encourage the committee to vote favorably on the Cherish Act.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. My name is Matthew Auberg, and I'm faculty at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering. Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony in favor of the Cherish Our Communities Act on behalf of Johns Hopkins University and in solidarity with communities overburdened by environmental pollution and other stressors across the state of Maryland. I have the amazing opportunity to co-create cutting-edge environmental health research driven by and for local environmental justice leaders, community scientists, and youth change makers from frontline communities in both urban and rural communities in Maryland. Through our collaborative research in urban South Baltimore, we've been investigating the community health and quality of life impacts at industrial facilities like incinerators, polluted sites, waste sites, fossil fuel handling, processing, and storage facilities such as an open-air coal terminal. In rural Maryland Eastern Shore, at the fence line of industrial food animal production, residents have concentrated animal feeding operations or CAFOs in their backyards. They're concerned about air pollution, wretched malodors, and contamination of the well water they rely on. And this is compounded by biogas infrastructure development in their backyards, concentrating animal waste and ensuing impacts. The Cherish Act presents an opportunity to join communities in improving protection from these cumulative impacts while amplifying the power, beauty, and strength already existing within every community. The bill has been developed by a community-led coalition addressing structural needs from the ground up. Critically, Cherish covers permit renewals in addition to new and expansion permits to hold historical polluters appropriately accountable while ensuring new facilities and operations are good neighbors to local residents. Cherish also allows our state permitting structure to reflect the cumulative nature of these legacy and current harms, and this can improve health outcomes and decrease healthcare costs for all Maryland residents. Maryland has a critical opportunity to be a champion for environmental justice, particularly in a national landscape when champions are needed now more than ever. Thank you for your time, and I urge a favorable report on the Cherish Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Corman, and everyone on the committee. My name is Dr. Natalie Exum. I'm an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering. I am an expert on drinking water quality issues, and I work with communities all throughout Maryland on what they're concerned about. And I have heard, even just in this last year, time and time again, coal ash in my drinking water, PFAS being released from military sites. Community members come to me and asking me to test their drinking water to say what is in it. Is it going to harm me? This bill would holistically take in what these communities are being burdened with. So if you want to bring down Medicaid costs, a great way to do it is prevent more cancer and cancer treatments and chemotherapy treatments from happening, which means less toxic metals being ingested into our population. It is good math, it is good health, it is good for the environment, and it will really impact. Not everyone here will have an EJ community in their district. So I just encourage you, so this is going to be extremely impactful in very key places in Maryland, and I encourage you all to be favorable for HB 814.
Thank you very much. We have virtual favorable witnesses. We'll start with Nura Palmapucha, Johns Hopkins University.
Hello, thank you to the chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify. My name is Nira Pucha. I'm an associate professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins and a pulmonary physician providing care to the residents of Baltimore City and surrounding communities. And in this I strongly support this legislation. The health effects of pollution have been well studied, and we know that air pollution causes acute and chronic respiratory diseases of people of all ages. This is not really something that we debate. Communities, individuals, and workers living near sources of pollutants, such as industrial sources of pollution, are disproportionately affected. These disproportionate impacts are evident to citizens in the community of Baltimore and also to healthcare workers like me who treat people in the region. Not only is pollution from sources such as industry to blame for causing asthma and respiratory disease, it's equally to blame for flare-ups and repeated hospitalizations due to the disease. It is a vicious cycle and a pattern that has major negative impacts on the health of citizens in the region. Those who work in hospitals like me see patients who present in extremis, struggling to breathe, to our hospitals in the region. Hospitalizations have a major human cost and substantial financial burden. The residents of Baltimore and Maryland living near industrial sources of pollution feel these costs every day because of the air they breathe and the environments in which they live and work. It is clear that industry contributes substantially to these adverse environments. We still have a lot of work ahead to improve respiratory health in Maryland. However, this legislation is an important step in the right direction. I strongly support this legislation as a physician at Johns Hopkins and a researcher in the field of respiratory health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to Maria Payan, Sussex Health and Environmental Network. Sorry for butchering the name.
That's quite all right. So thank you to the committee for having us, and I really want a favorable report on this testimony. It's very important to us. My name is Maria Payan. I am the Executive Director of Sussex Health and Environmental Network, and we also do work on the Lower Eastern Shore of Maryland. And I want to tell you a story about some of the work that's being done right now. So currently, many of the environmental permit applications, they don't even include a public notice or engagement process. Right now, we have a community on the Lower Eastern Shore in Salisbury where a gentleman bought a property, went to Salisbury and applied for a permit for an ag storage building. His neighbors include two-time cancer survivors, veterans that are already having health and breathing issues, chronic issues from asbestos, double lung transplant folks. We have daycare centers there. This is in an ag residential area. Come to find out, the gentleman, while applying for an ag storage permit, is holding an air permit for a biorefinery plant. This has been a 10-year pilot project that has produced little except a mess on the last farm that he was on. And this is millions of dollars of public money. The product that they want to make is threefold: biochar, which is loaded in phosphorus and can't go on the fields here; bio oil, which is used for asphalt extenders, not agriculture in nature, and syngas, which is used for jet fuel and marine fuel. And this is someone who wants to move in the middle of a neighborhood with no public notice to anyone.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to Rachel Castile, Sentinels of Eastern Shore Health.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Castile. I work with Sentinels of Eastern Shore Health. I thank you for the opportunity to express our strong support of House Bill 1484. The Cherish Act prioritizes Maryland's residents' well-being and ensures that MDE's decision-making processes are transparent and inclusive. By requiring robust public participation and thorough impact analysis, this would actually inject environmental justice considerations into decisions before the harm is done. In our own communities, we witness every day the impact of cumulative environmental harm done to our state's most vulnerable residents. Concentrated animal feeding operations, waste incinerators, waste to energy industries, and similar high pollution facilities have exacted a heavy toll on all of Maryland's communities, especially environmental justice communities, from the Eastern Shore to Baltimore and beyond. You may hear from others about the well-being of rural communities like ours on the Eastern Shore. What is actually unfair and unreasonable is the complete and utter disregard for the environmental and health impacts we battle on a daily and historic basis. If you've never vomited in your car driving past corporatized animal operations that prey on locals, if you've never had to decide between buying your asthma medication or your groceries, if you've never had to lament the expansive loss of environmental vitality around your little slice of heaven, you may not be in the position to tell us that we are already protected. HB 1484 addresses the root of the problem, the decision-making process that has historically permitted environmental harm to be concentrated in poor, underrepresented, and intentionally disenfranchised areas. This will help ensure that no community is left behind, unheard, or unprotected in the face of environmental decision-making. This bill represents a commitment to cherish our communities, as its name implies, and to uphold the basic rights of all Marylanders to a healthy environment. We strongly support HB 1484 to safeguard our most vulnerable communities and move Maryland towards true environmental justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I see no questions, so appreciate all the favorable witnesses. We're going to turn to unfavorable. We have Karen Sanu or Kamita Gray, Grayson Middleton, and Bob Enton. One of you, please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Grayson Middleton. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for Delmarva Chicken Association. On behalf of our members, I'm here today in opposition of HB 1484. Intentionally or not, this bill is anti-ag. Among the 22 different permits covered in this legislation is the concentrated animal feeding operation permit. Now, I'm hearing that it might be amended. This is the first time I'm hearing about that, but I'm going forward as if it's not. Which is required by every chicken farmer in the state, and I think that that's an important distinction. Family farms hold the vast majority of CAFO permits issued in this state. So if you think that they're not included, that's not true. Despite what you may hear today, the vast majority of chicken farms in this state are owned by families. We assert that the requirements under this legislation are unreasonable for farmers who are already faced with countless obstacles and bureaucracy in obtaining the proper permits, so much so that an entire industry exists to help them fill out the paperwork. The legislation also requires MDE to exceed their legal authority. Delegate Boyce, I know that we had this conversation last year with MDE, and they ended up determining that because of the way the permit is structured and delegated by the EPA, MDE does not have the authority to place additional parameters on the 9 that currently exists, which do not allow for any discharge. These cannot be altered on a farm-by-farm basis. And I think that covers pretty much everything I have to say without taking up too much of your time. So thank you, and we urge an unfavorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Building Industry Association. You have our written testimony. You know, when I looked at this bill, and and my clients looked at it, and I think the concern that we have is that it's going to significantly increase timing and cost for any type of heating system, water system, septic system, for every single project that's more than 1 acre in size. So my clients rely on services. You know, you can't build a new development or a housing project without having these types of services, and the need for these permits, we believe, is going to significantly increase both the cost and the delay. You know, it's interesting, no one reached out to us for 1 second about this bill to work with the building industry, or I don't know about the other industries involved. But, you know, this is a 11-page bill with a 14-page fiscal note. And if you look at the fiscal note, if you go to page 12, you know, it talks about the tremendous impact and the cost involved for state and local governments with this legislation. That's a real concern to us. Interestingly, the fiscal note for the bill is $2.2 million per year to implement this legislation. It also talks about the EJ screening tool. I would urge you to do what my client's done. You go online and try to access the EJ screening tool that exists today, and it pops up and shows the tool is currently under construction. We'd like to work with the sponsor. He says he's interested in limiting the bill. We'd be happy to work with any amendments, but we can't support the bill in its present form. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again. Grayson, there's been several comments from the witnesses that are in favor of this bill about CAFOs today. And I'd just like to know what kind of pollution comes from CAFO, what kind of air pollution, water pollution. Just could you fill the committee in on what kind of pollution comes from these CAFOs that are listed in this bill?
Thank you, Delegate. I have not had opportunity to review the written testimony from the folks from JHU, who I believe said that they could cite some, although I did find it curious that they said there were concerns rather than actual presence of pollution in their testimony. But I will say that a few years ago, we established the Eastern Shore Air Monitoring Project with the Keith Campbell Foundation, and it found that PM2.5, I hope I'm using the right term, and ammonia levels were the same as that of on the Western Shore. As far as water pollution, as I mentioned before, the 9 principles laid out in the CAFO permit right now do not allow for any water discharge. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you for those answers. Hopefully the amendment will be taking CAFOs out of the bill. Thank you.
Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Middleton, I just wanted to ask you if you are open to an amendment that would restrict this to the large CAFOs, which actually there is a definition of large CAFO in code, but excluding the small and medium-sized ones, so we're not hitting those like family operations.
Again, Delegate Ruth, I respectfully, I think that is based off of a misunderstanding, because if I'm correct, and I would have to get back to you on this just to confirm, but I believe the definition of a large CAFO would pretty much still cover every family farm in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Family chicken farm. So a regular standard sized chicken house, large CAFO per MDE's definition.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it if you could get me that information.
I will, ma'am.
Thank
yes.
you.
Great, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1484. Just to give everyone an idea of the schedule, floor's at 5, so we're going to keep piling through bills here. We'll get through what we can. After floor, which we expect to be a couple of hours, we're going to come back and finish our bill hearings. Then we're going to have a voting session. Then subcommittees are going to meet. So buckle up, order taken, drink some more coffee, and we're going to call up House Bill 1263, Delegate Adams, Natural Resources, Public Clam Fishery Area Establishment.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. I'm going to take your cue. I'm going to go ahead and take your cue and make a presentation and pass my testimony off to the panel. House Bill 1263, titled Natural Resources, Public Clam Fishery Area Establishment. This bill requires the Department of Natural Resources, in consultation with the Tidal Fisheries Advisory Commission, to identify by regulation the public clam fishery area in the Chesapeake Bay based on 3 different criteria. The public clam fish area may not be leased for shellfish aquaculture. A tidal fish license holder may catch clams in areas located outside the public clam fishery area unless prohibited by law. Sponsors editorial on this. I'm proud to stand with our watermen who are asking for this bill for my district. The bill seeks to add regulation where there's currently none. The hope is that by adding some regulation, that we also help avoid conflict with aquaculture by helping define some of these areas. We are, in fact, supporting our watermen on the Eastern Shore at the same time that we're trying to make less the burden of having aquaculture put at a disadvantage, we'll call it, it's the best way to describe it, as they're coming in wanting to lease areas and then realizing they're on prime areas that are clamming for us. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to pass the testimony to my committee. I'm proud to sponsor the bill, and I'd ask for your favorable support.
Mr. Chair, Madam Co-Chair, members of the committee, I'm Jeff Harrison with the Talbot Waterman Association. Yeah, this bill really is trying to correct something that happened back in 2009 when Clam was taken completely out of the new bill then that promoted aquaculture. It does not take the ability of all areas, but what it's trying to focus on is historic areas that have always been clammed, and it's mostly for clamming for bait for crabs. There's only 45 or 50 clammers on the bay, but they actually sell to another 30 people each, and so it really affects the clamming industry or the crabbing industry. They use that bait to catch crabs. I was, this past year, I was working with a consensus group in the coalition, Eastern Bay Coalition, and this was one of the things that came up was the problem that we're having with lease bottom. And what happens is someone can go in and lease whatever area they want, and if it goes all the way through the process, which sometimes can take 3 to 4 years, and we find out it's on clam bottom, there's nothing that we can do. We've actually taken it to court before, and we basically said that we had no standing because there's no such thing as clam bottom. So this bill is really only trying to correct that. Like I said, there are most of the clammers is done in Talbot County and Queen Anne. There are some other areas that it happens. And so it affects a small area, but it does correct that problem where clammers really don't have a say in anything. And so, like I said, we're not trying to protect all the areas, just a few. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Robert T.
Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of this committee, my name is Robert T. Brown, and I'm president of the Maryland Waterman Association. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'd like to have a favorable on this Bill 1263. Clamming started back in the 1960s on Chesapeake Bay, and everything was going along fine, and then came around and had this 2009, the sanctuary bill went in. Well, back prior to that bill and on the sanctuaries, to get the lease bottom, it had to be not a natural oyster bar. It had to be a barren bottom. It could not be productive bottom or clam bottom at that time. But when this bill was drawn up, it was left out. And what it has done, it also changed the way that we have our leases. It used to be just bottom leases where you planted the oysters on the bottom. Now, when this new bill went in, it made water column leases. And that changed the whole picture, the way it went. The water column leases is you don't have to put the oysters on the bottom. You can have them in the cages sitting on the bottom. You can float them halfway in the middle, or you can float them on the top. And what that does is places that people would not years ago even attempt to lease, they are trying to do it now. And the clammers have no recourse. Once somebody applies for it and you take them, and it's been on the Eastern Shore and on Western Shore, when you go to court and the administrative hearing on it, what do you protest? Well, we are clamming there. That's what we are doing. And the problem happens is you have no grounds for it. So I'd like to have a favorable on this. And this is primarily for the primary ground that the clammers work on. And we also have to have it so that the tidal fishery holders that are clamming that they can work in other places which are not the primary ground. You can ask any clammer today, where are they going to start at in a couple of weeks when the season comes in, they'll tell you, because that's their prime ground. And that's what we're trying to do, is protect them. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We'll bring up James Mullen virtually, Maryland Oystermen's Association.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. There we go. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Jim Mullen with the Maryland Oystermen's Association. I'm in agreement with what Mr. Harrison and Mr. Brown just said. And I think at the end of the day, the goal of the bill here is all the stakeholders would work together to collect better data for better science to make better decisions moving forward, so one user group isn't pushed out by another user group. So I think when everyone cooperates, everyone wins. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. For the question, Delegate Jacobs.
Mr. Chairman, so I guess either Jeff or Robert T. could answer this question, but historically, clams are a biological mystery. I mean, they're here today, they're gone today, and they show up here, and you have grounds that are historic clam grounds. I clammed when I was a young teenager when they had a 40 bushel limit, and clams were much more plentiful then, but they were here and then they were gone. So you couldn't always predict that they're going to be in the same place year after year after year. So we have that issue. And then we also now have the issue of the cow nose rays eating the soft shell clams and the razor clams, and the blue cats are eating on the soft shell clams. And I noticed in DNR's testimony here, they talk about right in the beginning, the first paragraph, about how clam bottoms fluctuate. And then it goes down 3 paragraphs, and it said this will present an obstacle to aquaculture. Well, that's the problem. In 2009, they eliminated the clam industry from the application for an aquaculture lease. Is that sort of why you're bringing the bill, right?
Yeah, that's true. And you're right about clams. And that's not what this bill is about. It's about there are some areas that historically are used for basically baked clams. And that's what it's trying to protect. And really, it kind of helps aquaculture too, because what happens is a lot of people who have no knowledge of the bottom, they go and they lease the bottom, and they don't realize that, see, clams grow on this really hard sandy bottom that shifts. And if you try to do aquaculture on it, it just doesn't work. So in a way, we had one guy who actually had a lease, was on clam bottom. We talked to him for 4 years before we finally convinced him to pull his lease. And it was basically that he was getting ready to throw his money away. So, you know, this can help both sides. It really can.
Thank you.
Great. We do have additional testimony. Joined us Tim Mortis, Maryland Watermen's Association, virtually. Mr. Mortis, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm just trying to unmute here.
Terrific. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to thank the department for doing this. We just don't want to see clams get pushed to the side. As one of Hartford County's only waterman-owned crab houses, the bait clams have changed the game over the years, and I'll agree with everything else that everybody has said already so far. We just don't want to see those forgotten. That's all. Thank you.
Terrific. Any further questions on this bill? Okay, that concludes Bill House Bill 1263. We're going to go to House Bill 1255, Delegate McComas, Land Use Historic Preservation Commission, right of appeal. And if you have a panel or anything, feel free to bring them up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very good bill. It's a simple bill, and it's something that my town wants, the town of Bel Air. My partner here on my right is the mayor of Bel Air, Paula Edding, and we've only had a few women that have been the mayors of Bel Air, and Paula is one of the few. HB 1255, Land Use Historic Preservation Commission right to appeal. This bill is meant to clarify and codify the appeal rights of those who own land areas deemed to have historic significance. Under Title 8 of the Land Use article, Historic Preservation, local authorities have certain powers to preserve sites and/or structures by following procedures set forth by the local zoning authority. Before a landowner may make changes that would affect the historic significance of any such site or structure, the owner must apply to the local Historic Preservation Commission for approval before the project may move forward. Under Title IV zoning of the land use article, and upon application by the landowner, the local Board of Appeals may hear and decide whether any decision by the commission is errant in its determination. A 1982 Attorney General opinion advised that the town of Easton that Section 4-305 gave the local Board of Appeals the power to hear and decide appeals from the decisions of the local historic district commissions. The opinion went on to state that Section 4-406 allowed the locality to provide an alternative right of appeal of such decisions directly to the circuit court. Although an option, an appeal to the circuit court is expensive and time-consuming for all concerned. In 2012, the land use article was revised again. However, the reviser opined that consideration by the General Assembly was needed because the appeal rights and the process for appeal for those aggrieved remained unclear. That is exactly why HB 1255 proposes to do is clarify and codify those rights. Now, I did have an opportunity to get the testimony from the folks that were proponents of the bill, as well as Baltimore City, which did not want to take away the ability of their group to deal with the way they have currently been dealing with these issues. So we are fine with an amendment to that bill. We just think that this is really, we're a very small town. We're only 3 square miles. We're the county seat. We're very, you can just go anywhere, lots of supermarkets within a very short distance from your house. So we think this is very friendly, and it's something that our Historic Commission had asked and requested. So with that, I turn it over to Mayor Eddie.
Thank you, Delegate McComas. Good afternoon, Chair Corman and Vice Chair Boyce and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on what is probably the least controversial bill you're going to hear this afternoon. House Bill 1255 will bring clarity to the question of how to appeal the decision of the Historic Preservation Commission. I think we owe that to our residents, a clear path to an appellate decision. In 1982, the Attorney General's opinion started off with saying that unfortunately this question is not easy to answer, and I think it really should be. The 2012 reviser's notes also pointed out that it was unclear what was the correct appellate path. In 2025, today, here we are, the Maryland Historic Trust contacted me and asked why this bill was in. They thought it was clear that you could go to the Board of Appeals. The town's attorney thinks it's clear that you can go to circuit court, and then we have the City of Baltimore who wants to make it clear that you can go to circuit court. Certainly, I'm not opposed to that whatsoever. I think every jurisdiction should have the ability to make the choice what's best in their jurisdiction, whether it's to go to circuit court, which can be very time-consuming, very costly, or to allow the residents to go to the Board of Appeals, which is going to get you a much quicker decision. You can go by yourself without an attorney. You don't have to file an appellate memo. It's just a faster, quicker, simpler way for our residents to get a review of a decision of the Historic Preservation Commission. I certainly support, clarity is what I want in the law. You know, I always would say, I follow the rules, just tell me what they are. So I'd like to tell people what the rules are so they know where to go and we don't have any errors that they then suffer. So I won't read my letter, which goes through a bunch of details about what happens when you have to go to circuit court, but most people would probably get an attorney. You have to follow a memorandum. There are a lot of rules, including font size and all sorts of other technical details that really are very intimidating to folks. We'd like it to make it a small, local, friendly, go to the Board of Appeals if you're unhappy. Thank you so much.
Mayor, thank you. We're going to bring up Laura Bianca Pruitt, Town of Bel Air, virtually. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, my name is Laura Bianca Pruitt. I am the planner to the Town of Bel Air and the staff liaison to the Town Historic Preservation Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I am here in support of House Bill 1255 because it helps clarify the appeal process for historic preservation cases in Section 8-308. This text uses the phrase Planning Commission in place of Zoning Board or Commission, which is confusing for the Town of Bel Air because we have a board called the Planning Commission whose appeals go to the Harford County Circuit Court, while our Historic Preservation Commission, HPC, appeals currently go to the Town Board of Appeals, BOA. Our HPC wanted to ensure that property owners in our small town still have the option to have an intermediate appeal with our town BOA. Unlike the circuit court, the town BOA is entirely made up of citizens of Bel Air, and therefore they are closer to the situation and what is best for Bel Air. Appeals to the town BOA cost $300 plus the hearing and advertising, and will take 1 to 2 months depending on the specifics. Appeals to the circuit court will cost less, but will likely take longer and may require an attorney. It says in the reviser's note of 8-308 that the Land Use Article Review Committee, and I quote, recommends establishing a clear appellate path for these matters, indicating whether or not there is a local option or requirement to proceed through the local Board of Appeal, or whether direct judicial review is always available. Therefore, our town, with the help of Mayor Edding and Delegate McComas, decided to do just that, make a clear indication that there is a local Board of Appeal option available. While there have been no direct problems that arose with historic preservation appeals in our jurisdiction, the Town Board of Commissioners felt strongly that this needed to be clarified before the next appeal happens. And this is why we support House Bill 1255. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1255. Colleagues, we will come back for our final 6 bills, followed by a voting session, followed by subcommittees. See you all on the floor. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.